All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today, I want to talk to you guys about the ultimate overview of Gnostic heresies from the ancient period into the Middle Ages. And so today's stream, I'm actually really excited about. I imagine for most people, you're going to learn about, at least become aware of so many different Gnostic traditions that you'd probably have never heard of. We're going to be going again. I think over near 40 different Gnostic schools or traditions or orientations that we're going to discuss. And so today's stream, we're not going to be getting super in depth into any of them. The goal is to provide the most comprehensive overview of Gnosticism, basically from the ancient period into the Middle Ages. Why the Middle Ages? Well, after the Renaissance, we start getting into these esoteric, what really was generally described as the Western esoteric traditions. And that is a syncretic blend of alchemy and astrology and magia and Gnosticism. So it really becomes its own thing. When we talk about Gnosticism, in groups that, well, we're going to highlight some of the tendencies of the ancient Gnostic school, where when we look at like Gnosticism in the contemporary period, there's a lot of things that are still Gnostic. I'm actually going to go over a handful of general attributes of Gnosticism that we still see, but one of them is the Christology. It's very common in the New Age, which has a lot of Gnostic elements, that they have a sort of Arian Christology, right? The whole Christ consciousness thing, Christ consciousness. Well, that is an Arian Christology, that he's basically a man who becomes enlightened, and again, within a Gnostic worldview, through spiritual knowledge. Whereas the Gnostic sects that we're going to be highlighting today, the vast majority actually have a docetic Christology. What do I mean by that? Well, docetism, as we'll highlight, is actually a heresy that rejects the humanity of Christ. And so he is God, he is fully divine, but is he man? Did he defecate? Did he have genitalia? Did he bleed? No. Those were just emanations. That was a representation. That was an illusion. And so a lot of these ancient Gnostic schools that we're going to be going over today, they have an epistemic rejection of the material world due to their creation narrative. And so we're going to highlight all this stuff before we start going through. Again, I have tons of things that I want to cover with you guys today. So I really do think there is going to be no overview like this overview today in regards to discussing all these different traditions. And that's the point, is that some of you guys maybe become more interested in certain traditions. For example, some of you know my academic research. I was very much interested in trying to highlight. This book, The Psychedelic Gospels, looking at all these sort of Christian frescoes that contain what appeared to be like Amanita muscaria mushroom references. Back in my psychedelic days, even my Gnostic days when I was very sympathetic to Gnosticism, I was like, oh, wow, there's these ancient Christian traditions that were using psychoactive mushrooms in a sort of Eucharistic endeavor. Well, diving deeper and deeper and deeper, I became aware, well, all these churches are sort of historically contextualized right around the growth of the Cathar heresy. Cathar, some of you guys are going to be familiar with that. We're talking about southern France, southern Germany, northern Italy. But how did they get there? Well, that comes from the influence of the Paulicians out of Armenia, the Tondrakians in Armenia, the Bogomils in Bulgaria, all of which were Gnostic and all of which were participating in, we could say in various forms of potentially intoxicating endeavors for spiritual knowledge. So to begin then today's stream, I got to say, like, what is Gnosticism? Because this is a bit of a misnomer. I got all these books down here on Gnosticism, and this one right here by Michael Allen Williams, this is a scholastic book that it says Rethinking Gnosticism, an argument for dismantling a dubious category. Why? Because is there such thing as a singular Gnosticism? Is there a single tradition we can describe as Gnostic in the ancient world? Actually not. There's a handful of tendencies, and that's what we're going to use to describe Gnosticism. And then we're going to go over, again, all these different schools, tons of different schools, the Simonians, the Borborites, the Carpocratians, the Sethians, the Ophites, the Thomasines, all these different groups are different forms of Gnosticism, which was competing with the Orthodox Church, which was competing with the development of Paul and the apostles and what we would consider Orthodox Christianity, which really gets crystallized in the first council, or really through the 7 ecumenical councils. But what is Gnosticism then? If it's a dubious category, according to many scholars today, what exactly is Gnosticism then? And so I would say there's a handful of features that can categorize these sort of spiritual worldviews as quote unquote Gnostic or participating in Gnosticism. The first and foremost category is this sort of existential pursuit for spiritual knowledge in relation to self-divinization. And so Gnosticism is absolutely emphatic that the ways that we become divinized, the ways you return to the realm of pure light, because again, Gnosticism is going to reject the material world as de facto ontologically evil because of their creation myth. And this is the vast majority of the Gnostic traditions that we're going to look at today. They almost all have a sort of Marcionism, another heresy, which believes that the Old Testament God is different from the New Testament God, and that the Old Testament God is in fact Yaldabaoth, Beelzebub, the devil, the evil one, this sort of bastardized child that comes from Sophia, the personified feminine wisdom figure. Okay, and so the ways in which then you break out of this demonic material realm, this is what Gnosticism's trying to deal with. And Gnosticism is inherently a syncretic tradition. What I mean by that, it's a blending of multiple things. It's the blending of Christianity. It's the blending of Judaism. It's the blending of Zoroastrianism, has Persian influences. There's a blending of Plato and Neoplatonism, especially the theurgic elements of Neoplatonism. Those are going to be familiar with Neoplatonism. There's also a blend. There's even Buddhist elements that get brought into Gnosticism. And so Gnosticism is in a way a sort of attempt to amalgamate and bring together all these different religious traditions to form a new concept of what Christ is, generally speaking. So they use Jesus Christ. And for those of you who have read the Nag Hammadi scriptures, we're going to get into what these things are, because it wasn't really until 1945 that we even could read Gnostic texts written by Gnostics. You see, for the vast majority of history, all we had was Hippolytus, Tertullian, most notably Irenaeus against heresies, of what these Gnostic groups were and what they believed in. A lot of their literature got destroyed due to them being heresies. And so in 1945, a couple brothers in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, stumbled across this glass jar filled with manuscripts and codexes. In fact, they burned some of them just to keep warm, not knowing what exactly they had. Eventually, a man saw what they had. He said, guys, these are ancient manuscripts. They get translated and forms what's called the Nag Hammadi scriptures. These are basically 48 other books describing, in a way, some sort of apostolic connection to Jesus, or reframing who Jesus is. Are they apostolic? No. That's the thing, is all these books, I think, one of the earliest ones and probably the most famous Gnostic text is the Gospel of Thomas, and we know for a fact that was in the 2nd century. So that was somewhere between the year 100 and 200. Most scholars settle somewhere, last I checked, somewhere between like 120 to 160 AD. Were these connected to the apostles? Was the Gospel of Thomas connected to the Apostle Thomas who traveled to India? No, it's not. But to get authority during this ancient period, they would write the Gospel of Mary. They would write the Gospel of Judas. They would write the Gospel of Thomas as if they were coming from those apostles and part of that apostolic tradition. And so the things that unify what we're going to call Gnosticism today is the idea that the material world is bad. This was created not by the transcendent Trinity or God. It was created by a bastard child, Yaldabaoth, that comes from Sophia. And therefore, they take an epistemic approach to materiality as de facto wrong, bad, and evil. When we look at the New Age, as I said, this actually kind of gets flipped. And so for the Gnostics, they adopted a very Platonic and Neoplatonic view that things that are non-physical or spiritual are somehow better than those that are physical and material. And we look at the New Age today, their worldview is actually going to sort of ingratiate materiality as good. The cosmos is good. Your body, sex, all this stuff is really good. And therefore you see the Christology flip, where it privileges Christ as a man who learns knowledge and becomes divine Christ consciousness, versus these ancient Gnostic and medieval heresies that said, no, he's actually only divine, and all that humanity stuff, that's an illusion. That's not real because it's evil, right? So if God is pure light coming from the realm of the pleroma, then when Jesus Christ came to save us from this bastard creation, which is the general premise of their creation narrative, that again, the New and the Old Testament are separate. So the New Testament, Christ coming from the pure light is God, but he's breaking through these various forms of emanations, taking on the illusion of a physical body so that he could then teach us how to break free and return back to the pleroma, the realm of the pure light. So this in a way is a prison. The material world is a prison in the Gnostic sense. Their worldview is also does not talk in terms of sin and repentance. So this is a fundamental paradigmatic difference between what would become Orthodox Christianity, even the Christianity laid out there by Paul in the epistles and some of the other disciples, verse the Gnostic traditions. You see, the Gnostic traditions were not talking about sin and repentance as much as they were talking about the illusion and enlightenment. You can almost think of the Hindu concept of Maya. Maya is the Sanskrit term for illusion. The idea that materiality is an illusion. This isn't ultimately real. Therefore, epistemically, in regards to knowledge claims, truth claims, you can't make any truth claims about material because it's all an illusion. So the Gnostics were consistent with that. So, per se. And therefore, the only way to not be deceived by the illusion is to gain enlightenment through spiritual knowledge, gnosis. Those of you who already know, Gnosticism just comes from the root word gnosis or gnostikos, meaning knowledge, Greek word for knowledge. The whole point is that by acquiring more secret knowledge, you become more divine. And this is another paradigmatic shift. You see, I've talked about this with Father Turbo multiple times, is that Orthodoxy does not believe in secret knowledge. So there's one of the premises that runs through many Gnostic gospels is that Christ had secret knowledge that he revealed to certain disciples. In the gospel of Mary Magdalene, it was Mary. In the gospel of Judas, it was Judas. So in the gospel of Thomas, it was Thomas. Certain apostles had the secret teachings, the secret goods. Orthodoxy doesn't teach that. Orthodoxy teaches the role of a Christian is to proclaim truth as exoterically as possible. We don't have secret truth, secret tradition, secret gnosis that illuminates us. We're illuminated by the uncreated energies of God, which again gets back into the energy essence distinction. But today's stream's not so much about laying out Orthodox theology as, again, providing this comprehensive overview of Gnosticism. So, like I said, it's an existential pursuit of knowledge, which leads to an apotheotic form of divination. So another difference is that in Orthodoxy, we can think of our worldview as having theosis. In Neoplatonism, we can think of them having henosis. And in Gnosticism, they have apotheosis. Apotheosis is the sort of self-divinization through the acquirement of spiritual knowledge. Theosis is the divinization by grace, God's grace, because Christ, fully God, became fully man, that when we engage in the uncreated energies, we can cross that bridge laid out by Christ into eternity. That is theosis. Henosis, the Neoplatonic worldview, is that through theurgic practices, ritualistic, magical rituals, we can break down the emanations of the world and move back to the one. And so you have theosis, henosis, and then apotheosis. And apotheosis, shout out to Shaunaverse for becoming a member. God bless you, brother. Thank you so much for becoming a member, Shaunaverse. Thank you very, very much, brother. Truly appreciate it. And by the way, all the members, we will be getting more emojis. I know we have a handful of emojis right now. The Ortho Chad Priest, the Beta Atheist. We're going to be getting more thanks to Andrew over at the Crucible and some of his team. They're going to be helping me out. So everybody who's a member, sign up if you can, if you'd like to support. We'll be getting more emojis for all you guys very, very soon. So thank you so much, Shaunaverse, for becoming a member. So theosis, henosis, apotheosis, okay? So you can see the existential element in Gnosticism is about this sort of self-divinizing process, okay? Also, like I said, is there such thing as a singular Gnostic tradition? No, they actually uh, differentiate and disagree on many different topics, and many Gnostic schools were in fact competing against each other. So we have, for example, monism versus dualism. Generally speaking, uh, Gnosticism in many of its forms were dualistic. So this material world was created in eternity and is in opposition eternally to the transcendent light of God. Um, However, there are, in regards to the Gnostic Syrian and Egyptian schools, you can see more of a monistic approach, more of a Neoplatonic or Platonic approach, which again, Gnosticism is a syncretic school of all these different things. So is it monistic or is it dualistic? Well, depends on which school we're talking about, you see. Is it ascetic or is it hedonistic? Well, for the vast majority of Gnostic sects, because the world is evil in their worldview, again, they reject when God created the world and said the world is good. They reject that. They've had a totally different interpretation of creation. So because of that, you have to then become ascetic and renounce the physical world. This is the beginning point of your spiritual knowledge. Um, Whereas other groups, such as the Carpocratians, instances of the Simonians, the Gnostic group developed by Simon Magus, um, the Borborites, we see homosexual tendencies, we see orgiastic sexual rituals, we see inebriating substances. So that sounds very different than the ascetic groups. Well, it is, because for some of these other Gnostic groups, the way that you break out from the material prison of creation is that you transgress all the boundaries. You transgress. So the idea that you would live ascetic life or not do X, Y, Z, they say, well, that's another illusion. Remember, their epistemic principle or premise about the world, that itself is an illusion. The only thing you can do is acquire more spiritual knowledge, which means have more spiritual experiences. And by that, have gay sex, which we have documented instances of, have various drug-induced experiences, perform magic rituals. This is then going to give you more spiritual knowledge and elevate you. So some of the traditions we're going to talk about took that approach. So ascetic or hedonistic, well, depends on which school you're talking about. All believe, as I said, in the salvific power of knowledge, spiritual knowledge. And Sophia, this sort of the feminine divine wisdom principle, throughout many of these schools can be generally described using Jungian terminology as the anima mundi, so the sort of world soul, if you will. Okay, so Sophia, and that's where people like Bulgakov, an Orthodox theologian, got in trouble because he brought Sophia sort of back into try to incorporate that into Orthodox theology, if you will. We don't need to go into that, but certainly brought about accusations of Gnostic elements into Christianity. So to recap here, epistemologically, the material world is ultimately not real, and therefore it causes questions about making material claims about the world. Therefore, the only thing that you should pursue is spiritual knowledge. So that's their epistemology. The cosmology is that the cosmos and the material world itself is ontologically evil because it's created by Yaldabaoth. And therefore, salvation is acquired through esoteric knowledge, the privileging of secret knowledge. Not everybody gets to know it, right? This is, again, one of the paradigmatic differences between orthodoxy, because theosis in the Orthodox sense is the engagement of these uncreated energies: truth, logic, reason, love, mercy, compassion, honor, glory, beauty. Anybody can engage in these things, whether you're deaf or mute, doesn't matter. That you can engage in these practices. Illiterate, doesn't matter. Therefore, theosis allows for a participatory experience in God that Gnosticism and a rationalistic process like Neoplatonism or Scholasticism has a little bit of a tougher time dealing with, because it privileges this sort of intellectual understanding of secret knowledge. Okay. And then the anthropology is, because the material world is bad, your body is bad. Okay. And so therefore in Gnosticism, the schools that we're going to be going over today, generally speaking, you are a soul and then you have a body, right? We talk about, based on the creation in Genesis, is that we are a body and we have a soul. But because they reject our worldview of creation, that creation is ultimately good, therefore Um, they instead claim that you're a soul and your body's bad. And this led to many Gnostic schools actually having an aversion to procreation. And so I had a handful of things I want us to keep in mind, because I want to get into all these different things to, as soon as we can, because we have tons of schools to go through. That there's a few general themes that I think we'll find overlap into today's sort of contemporary Gnostic New Age spirituality that we'll even find in some of these ancient Gnostic groups. So as we go through today, keep these in mind. General themes: aversions to procreation. So there's multiple examples that we know of Gnostic groups engaging in only anal and oral sex, and also homoerotic sex, both men and women, so that nobody would procreate. So we see already an aversion to having children in men, not all, but many Gnostic groups. Do we see this element arise in our contemporary world? I would say to some degree, in fact, we do. So an aversion against procreation led many Gnostic groups to practicing sexual acts or sexual rituals that would not lead to procreation. We have instances, for example, with the Borborites, where they would have ritualistic abortions and celebrate that, because what they did was they prevented a soul from getting trapped into this material prison from their worldview. So we do have instances, according to Hippolytus and Irenaeus, that the Borborites, for example, they would have a sort of ritualistic abortions. Do we see this happen in our world today? Interesting. So general theme, an aversion against procreation, which I think we absolutely see in people today. Vegetarianism. So another element we're going to see in many of these ancient Gnostic groups is that it is condemned to eat meat. Now, we're currently in Lent, and so those of us holding the fast know that we are abstaining from meat right now. But the Orthodox Church does not say that meat is bad. We're doing it to actually show that meat is good. God said everything is good. And so we have a celebration, the feast. We eat a lot of meat. Meat is a good thing. We don't have, the Orthodox Church does not have aversion to eating meat, even though we have fasting periods in which we renounce it or push it away, restrict it. Many of these Gnostic schools actually were totally vegetarian. And so when we talk about, in some of these, I immediately always think of Jim Bob debating some of these vegans. But it's funny, this spiritual idea that you need to eat, you need to only eat plants. You need to only eat fruit. You need to only eat vegetables. This is more spiritually advanced. Well, we find this idea even in these Gnostic schools that we're going to go over today. So aversion against procreation, vegetarianism. Another one, an elevated status of women. So there was vocal opposition to what they called the sort of patriarchy in the day, even in these ancient, in the ancient and medieval period. So within a handful of the Gnostic groups that we'll look at, there is even an elevation of women, and women could in fact lead a spiritual worship. Now, obviously, those who are familiar with Orthodoxy, even Catholicism, but the historic apostolic tradition of Christianity, it is fundamentally a patriarchal tradition of men who are priests. Well, we find that some of these Gnostic groups were vocally in opposition to that. And so when Paul says women should not lead men, or at least lead the church and lead these ritual services, well, what do we find? We find that Gnostic groups, in fact, did this. So is this an early representation of feminism, can you say? I don't know. But again, here's the first three general principles: an aversion against procreation, vegetarianism, and an elevated status of women. The next one is transgressive sexual. As I said, some of these groups were openly only performed anal sex. This is both for men with women, men with men, and then obviously it wouldn't be anal sex, but women with women were a thing because, again, the opposition to procreation. So that's another. Do we see that today? Do we see the promotion of sterile forms of sexuality, which was absolutely part of Gnostic spirituality? I would say yes, we do. So I said, including homoeroticism. Homoeroticism was actually elevated for some groups as a higher form of sexuality. We see this with Aleister Crowley, for example, in Thelema. Crowley was very in favor of men being sodomized by other men to be activated spiritually for higher knowledge, if you will. Okay, so I would say this is something that continues on, And we have evidence of this according, again, to Irenaeus and Hippolytus. I think even Tertullian speaks about some of the homosexual acts that the Gnostics were engaging in. And then the last one was inebriating substances. So again, according to all Tertullian, Hippolytus, and Irenaeus, we know, for example, that certain groups were engaging in inebriating substances. They would get drunk. They would, again, sort of a continuation of the Bacchanalia festivals of Rome, of the pagan festivals. Gnosticism viewed itself, and that's where some of the church fathers highlighted, as the continuation of the mystery schools. And so those of you who are familiar with like the Eleusinian mysteries would know that Albert Hoffman, Karl Ruck, and R. Gordon Watson, they all believed that the Eleusinian mysteries were in fact an inebriating ritual of an ergot derivative. So something similar to LSD or ergot, something like that. And so I actually did a paper tracing drug use up into Aleister Crowley, which I was thinking about making public over on the website. But in it, I actually document specifically some of these instances that I'm talking about and connect Manichaeanism, which was noted for using their love of mushrooms. And so we have documentation even all the way in China, where they would talk about how the Manichaeans love to eat red and white mushrooms. Could that be the Amanita muscaria? Well, certainly some scholars that are pro psychedelics believe so, but we know for a fact that there were Gnostic groups that were using mushrooms that would believe that they were continuing the inebriating rituals of the Eleusinian mysteries and these mystery schools, generally speaking. And so that's going to come back. Again, I have a whole stream on Soma among the Armenians. Soma, again, the inebriating beverage or god within the Rig Veda. So the Vedic form of Hinduism. But if you want to hear more about that, check over at that. So guys, smash that like if you're here. We're now going to, again, okay, let's see. Is this it right here? Let's see here. Can you guys see me? All right. So, hello, check. Check. Can you guys hear me right now? What happened? I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay, I'm getting yep. Okay, we're back. So if you look right here, this is look at all these tabs I got. All of these are going to be with various Gnostic schools and Gnostic sort of Gnostic traditions, if you will. So we got a ton to get into today. Before we do that, I want to tell everybody shout out to my buddy Daniel. God bless you, brother, for becoming a member. Shout out to Soon Kim. God bless you, bro. Thank you so much. He's been a big supporter of my work and big supporter of everything I've been doing with Church of the Eternal Logos. So God bless you, bro. Thank you so much, man, for becoming a member. I truly do appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. So again, we're going to go through all these different tabs today. I promise. Before I do that, I, of course, want to take care of a little housekeeping. First one, guys, for those of you who would like to join Subdeacon Mark, remember every Monday evening at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, my godfather is going through this book right here, Byzantine Theology, Historical Trends and Doctrinal Themes by Father John Meyendorff. If that is something you'd be interested in joining, totally free. All you got to do is go follow my Telegram. The link should be in the video description. Click that link, join my Telegram group, and you'll have every Monday, every Sunday, and Monday night, I share links that you can join private Zoom meetings for theology and Bible study. So make sure you do that. Check out my Telegram. Also, if anybody would like to support my work, the best way you can do so is become a website member. Sung Kim, my buddy Daniel, Shaunaverse. If you guys would like to become YouTube members, that is also another great way you can help me out. YouTube members allow you access to privileged, exclusive, original emojis and stuff like that. So if that's something you'd be interested in, just becoming a $5 member here on YouTube is a great way to help me out and help out my work. So thank you very much to Shaunaverse and Sung Kim for joining. Also, if anybody would like to sign up for a one-on-one session, we have opening slots available for next Wednesday. So if anybody would like to have a private discussion about, be it Gnosticism or orthodoxy or life or fitness or whatever it be, goal setting, you can have my undivided attention by signing up for a one-on-one session. Also, shout out to everybody who sponsored a stream. I have a very fun sponsored stream that's going to be coming on a deep dive into a deep dive. Here's the link for the one-on-ones. I have a deep dive into Rosicrucianism, and I've been really hitting the research for this one. So I'm looking forward to either doing it this Sunday or Tuesday. I should definitely have all the research done by Tuesday. But again, I hope to have basically the most holistic and in-depth presentation of what Rosicrucianism is, Christian Rosenkreuz. Hopefully this Sunday or Tuesday. And again, shout out to Meta Ninjas. Meta Ninjas sponsored that stream. Shout out to our buddy Meta Ninjas. Really looking forward to diving into that one. So I hope you guys are able to make it to that live stream, or at least watch it. Watch the replay if you don't make it, but it should be a lot of fun. So if you have a topic you'd like me to also do a stream on, you can sponsor a stream with that link right there. And that would also be a huge benefit. So guys, smash that like. Without further ado, let's now get into everything. So, okay, where do we start? Well, we're going to start by just looking at what Gnosticism is. So I was kind of providing an overview for you guys, but we're going to scroll down here. You already kind of get it. You already get the influences. The monad, again, some of the schools were more monistic than other schools, specifically the Syrian and the Egyptian schools. When we talk about the monad, well, I thought Gnosticism was dualistic. Well, the majority of them were. You're absolutely right. The majority of them were dualistic. However, there were monistic forms of Gnosticism. So I just wanted to highlight that. The pleroma, and we're going to see that term. What's the pleroma? The pleroma is the heavenly realm of pure light. This is where Jesus Christ comes from in the Gnostic worldview. This is where God resides in the Gnostic worldview. The material world is evil. And so the pleroma is the heavenly pleroma, is the center of divine life, a region of light above our world, occupied by spiritual beings such as aeons or eternal beings, and sometimes archons. Archons are going to be these sort of evil entities that control this sort of fallen world. Jesus is interpreted as an intermediary aeon who was sent from the pleroma, with whose aid humanity can recover the lost knowledge of the divine origins of humanity. Okay, so that's the pleroma. That's part of Gnostic cosmology. Emanation, this is where the Platonic and the Neoplatonic elements come into what the Gnostic paradigm is. Well, it has to do with emanation. So the supreme light or consciousness descends through a series of stages, gradations, worlds, hypostases, becoming progressively more material and embodied, which is obviously a lesser presentation. So we can think of, for the more monistic forms of Gnosticism, I've talked about the idea of like a dot with concentric circles. This is a sort of Neoplatonic worldview, and all the concentric circles are emanations. We're on the furthest emanation. Plato had the same sort of cosmology, if you will, Neoplatonism, Platonism. And so Gnosticism also picks up on that. We have the aeons, what was just heard of. In many Gnostic systems, the aeons are the various emanations of the superior god or monad, beginning in certain Gnostic texts with the hermaphroditic Aeon Barbello. So we see hermaphrodism. Where do we see that today? Oh, well, how about in Baphomet? Well, where'd Baphomet come from? Baphomet came from the Knights Templars. The Knights Templar were practicing a Gnostic form of spirituality, and that's where they got into all these homoerotic elements, and that's why the Knights Templar were trying to be squashed in the Inquisition. And in the early 1300s, they flee from southern France because their leader gets killed, and they flee up to Scotland. And it's actually the King of Scotland who who allows them to sort of resurrect their tradition. And this emerges as what we would call Scottish Freemasonry. And he allows them to build the Rosalind Chapel there in Scotland. So, okay. So we see hermaphrodism, these aeons. He's the first emanated being. Various interactions with the monad occur, which result in the emanation of successive pairs of aeons, often in male-female pairings called syzygies. Okay, then we have Sophia. Sophia is the female principle. In Gnostic tradition, the term Sophia refers to the final and lowest emanation of God and is identified with the anima mundi, as I said earlier, or world soul. In most, if not all, versions of the Gnostic myth, Sophia births the demiurge, who in turn brings about the creation of materiality. The positive and negative depiction of materiality thus resides a great deal on mythic depictions of Sophia's actions. She is occasionally referred to by the Hebrew equivalent of Achamoth. Jewish Gnosticism with a focus on Sophia was active by 90 AD. Okay. So she gives birth to the demiurge. Here is a presentation of the demiurge. This was like, so we see a sort of lion-headed serpent. Again, obviously a sort of inversion of typical Christian symbolism. And so the demiurge derives from the Latinized form of the Greek term demiurgos, literally public or skilled worker. The figure is also called Yadaboeth. That's often when you read like the infancy gospels, which there's a handful of those, in some of the various Gnostic gospels on creation, he's usually referred to as Yadaboeth. I have seen Beelzebub being translated as well, which is Beelzebub is obviously who Jesus cast out and throws into the swine, right? So, or that was Legion. Beelzebub, he takes out of a possessed person, and they accuse him of exorcising Beelzebub by the help of Beelzebub, which makes no sense. But thus, in the latter case, okay, so he was sometimes ignorant of the superior God and sometimes opposed to it. Thus, in the later case, he is correspondingly malevolent. Other names include, El, Yahweh, Erham. So you see how the God of the Old Testament is already associated with the demiurge, if you will. Then you have the Archon. These are in late antiquity. Some variants of Gnosticism use the term Archon to refer to several variant or servants of the demiurge. Okay. And then so forth. So that's enough. That's the general overview. Now let's start to get into all these different variations. As I said, we became aware of the multiplicity of variations actually due to the Nag Hammadi. So it's through the Nag Hammadi that we learned more about the text and what they believe. We're not going to go into this. I've already kind of brought it up, but I just want to reiterate what the Nag Hammadi is and why it's important in regards to Gnosticism. Now let's provide our overview. So the first Gnostic tradition we're going to get into, well, generally is the Gnostic heresy. Again, as I said, this is the idea that is a heterodox doctrine that the phenomenon of Jesus, his historical and bodily existence, and above all, the human form of Jesus, were mere semblance without any true reality. Broadly, it is taken as the belief that Jesus only seemed to be human and that his human form was an illusion. Again, we talked about the epistemic basis of Gnosticism. And so that is a fundamental presupposition, that materiality itself is an illusion. Okay. This leads to the Thomasines. All right. So I chose them, as I said earlier, because the Gospel of Thomas is arguably the most famous or the most often referred to Gnostic gospel. And so the Thomasines were a Christian sect that originated in the 1st or 2nd century, who especially revered the Apostle Thomas and who originated the Gospel of Thomas. And there's a handful of other gospels that they're associated with as well, not just the Gospel of Thomas. And so the sect held esoteric, mystical, and ascetic ideas. They've been associated with the proto-Gnostics. However, modern critics have disputed their affiliation with Gnosticism, especially because they lack any Gnostic beliefs. Well, they lack certain Gnostic beliefs, like the acquisition of knowledge leads to salvation. Now, you can read, there's 2 actual forms of the Gospel of Thomas in this book. One's a little bit different than the other. And you can see how they reference biblical. So they reference Matthew, they reference Luke. Clearly, this community was already aware of those religious texts. They reinterpret it in a totally different way. So the way that the Thomasines interpret scripture, again, remember, the Bible wasn't totally put together, wasn't canonized yet. But the fact that when you go and look at some of these Gnostic texts, you can see, again, the Gospel of Thomas, written somewhere in the 2nd century, was directly referring to the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of John, the Gospel of Luke, the Gospel of Mark, but they had totally different interpretations of, say, what a verse meant. So that's that. According to one view, the Thomasines were an early group that questioned the authority of the Jerusalem church and the Apostle James, with the Thomasine church beginning around the middle of the 1st century. As I said, middle of the first. Well, from my understanding, it's the 2nd century is the evidence for the first text. So Elaine Pagels, she is famous. So this lady right here is famous for being a sort of Gnostic scholar. Elaine Pagels, she is a non-believer, and so she comes from what I think she's at Harvard, isn't she? I think maybe at Princeton University, but she worked on this book. So you can see Elaine Pagels right here. She claims weird stuff like, because this is the word concept fallacy. She claims that because Paul used the word pleroma in, I think, his epistle to the in Colossians, that he was also a proto-Gnostic. So this is highly debated, but Elaine Pagels has some very eccentric and unique opinions in regards to some of this stuff, but she is considered an authority, and she did work on the Nag Hammadi scriptures. So that's her, and we will probably refer to her a few times throughout today's discussion. So here's the Thomasines. What do we know about them? Their eschatology. The Thomasine theology was one who seeks the light will have a journey that ultimately ends in rest. The decision to follow Jesus is critical because the judgment is already being done in the world, and the universe could end at any time. Christology, the Gospel of Thomas refers to Jesus as the Son of Man and affirms his lordship. Jesus was too complex to be categorized or given a description. However, some passages of the Gospel of Thomas possibly indicate Jesus having some divinity. So we see more of an Arian Christology, a more an illuminated Christology here. Many scholars believe that the Gospel of Thomas was a Gnostic worldview, but on the other hand, some reject the Gnostic affiliations because they do not seem to have the same Gnostic mythology as Irenaeus describes in a form of mysticism, and the Gospel of Thomas lacks many Gnostic elements. Okay. So that is one group, the Thomasines. Here's another one, Valentinianism. So a really important person to actually know, if you've never heard of, is Valentinus. So this guy, Valentinus, best known and for his time the most successful early Christian Gnostic theologian. He founded his school in Rome. According to Tertullian, Valentinus was a candidate for bishop, but started his own group when another was chosen. So Valentinus, I believe, almost became the 2nd or 3rd bishop of Rome. So that'd been what developed historically into the Catholic Church. But Valentinus had his own Gnostic school, and their sort of claim to fame is what's called the Gospel of Truth. The Gospel of Truth. And they have a handful. I think there's 3 or 4. Don't quote me. But there's a handful of Gospels that are associated with the Valentinian school. And so Valentinianism is the form of Gnostic interpretation that stems from Valentinus, who is a Gnostic intellectual theologian of the early period who founded a school in Rome. Okay. So it was founded by Valentinus in the 2nd century. Its influence spread widely, not just within Rome, but also in Northwest Africa and Egypt. And that's where from my understanding, there is a Valentinian school in Alexandria. And from my research, I could be wrong, but I believe that's where many scholars believe the Gospel of Truth was actually written, was in Alexandria, Egypt, within a Valentinian Gnostic school. Within Africa to Egypt, through Asia Minor and Syria in the east. Later, the movement's history, it broke into Eastern and Western school. Disciples of Valentinus continued to be active into the 4th century AD, after the Roman Emperor Theodosius I issued the Edict of Thessalonica, which declared the Nicene Christianity as the state church of the Roman Empire. Well, glory to God for that. The doctrine and practices and beliefs of Valentinus and the Gnostic movement that bore his name were condemned as heretical by the Orthodox Christian leaders and scholars. Prominent church fathers such as Irenaeus, Hippolytus wrote against Gnosticism because early church leaders encouraged the destruction of Gnostic texts. That's partly why we didn't have access to read Gnostic scripture until 1945. So yeah, the Orthodox wanted to burn a lot of these heretical schools, because you have to realize there was way more Gnostic texts than there were considered Orthodox or truly apostolic texts. So we have the 4 canonical Gospels, the 3 synoptic, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then we have John. Those are the 4 canonical Gospels. And the theology, the understanding that was being developed by the apostles through those gospels was being competed with by a whole series, again, of these Gnostic groups. We're going to look at the Simonians here in a second. Those who have read your book of Acts know Simon Magus emerges because he wants to pay for his baptism. He wants to acquire the Holy Spirit through service. He wants to pay for it. Well, this is a heresy known as simony, right? So in the Orthodoxy, it's a heresy to pay for, like, to be able to just go to the church, give them money, and get baptized. You're supposed to go through the catechetical process, a catechesis, so that you understand the church and you realize what you're signing up for. Simon Magus didn't want to go through that process. He just wanted to purchase his baptism. And so that's called simony. It's a heresy. And we're going to get to the Simonians here in a second, because when he left, according to tradition, according to some of the church fathers, Simon Magus went and started his own Gnostic sect. So because early church leaders encouraged the destruction of Gnostic texts, most evidence for the Valentinian theory comes from its critics and detractors, most notably Irenaeus, since he was especially concerned with refuting Valentinianism, because it was actually quite popular. It was quite popular. So again, you guys can look into this stuff if you'd like. Again, we're just using a general overview here. So any of these traditions, we got tons of traditions to get through. Any of them you'd like to go through, you can find more detail. We're just going to be moving quickly, relatively quickly through these. So the next school that I want to get into are the Marcosians. The Marcosians, you guys may not have heard of that Gnostic school. Well, here's another one, the Marcosians. The Marcosians were a Gnostic sect founded by Marcus, active in Lyon, France, and Southern Europe from the 2nd to the 4th century. So you see a lot of these are going to emerge in the 2nd century. Women held special status in the Marcosian communities. They were regarded as prophetesses and participated in administering the Eucharist. So what did I say earlier about some of the general trends we're going to see? The elevation of women, right? And so what do we see by the Marcosians? The elevation of women in the distribution of the Eucharist as prophetesses. And one of the things that the Marcosians, according to Irenaeus and Hippolytus, is that they were noted for engaging in sexual rituals. And so Marcus ended up getting a very, let's say, an ill-favored reputation by married men, because he would try to get married couples to join his Gnostic group. And then he would basically tell them that the women were privileged and that if they slept with him, they would get more Gnostic knowledge, more spiritual knowledge. Well, we've seen this play out in regard to Hindu gurus, right? So many Hindu gurus have done the same thing. Married couples come in, they convince the married couple that the wife needs to sleep with the guru because then she'll become more illuminated. It'll be better for both their spirituality. Well, we know because a handful of men actually got pretty upset about it. Marcus was basically, it is another form of another sex group. So a lot of promiscuous forms of sexuality, according to the church fathers, were found or attributed to the school of the Marcosians. And so, as I said, women held a special status in the Marcosian communities. They were regarded as prophetesses and participated in administering the Eucharistic rites. Irenaeus accuses Marcus of seducing his followers and scornfully writes that the whole sect was an affair of silly women. So, yeah. And again, if you read against the heresies and if you look up Hippolytus and his polemical works, he also highlights that Marcus was sleeping with married women, and he would convince men to pass their wives over, basically. So the Marcosian system was a variation of the Valentinus system. It retained the 30 aeons, but called them greatnesses and gave them numerical values. And that's another thing that we'll see, is that Kabbalah begins to influence this tradition, and that numerology will begin to develop more and more and more in regards to some of these Gnostic schools as they move forward, because of theurgic, the magical, the astrological import of numbers, fusing both Kabbalah and like Pythagorean understandings of the value of numbers in the world based on numbers and all this different stuff. So Marcosian system, greatnesses, it kept the myth of the fall of Sophia, but called it a divine deficiency. Unique to it was the adaptation of the Pythagorean number theory. There we go. To Gnosticism. So again, I'm not making all this stuff up. If you guys want to read more about the Marcosians, you can do so. Again, these are just good, like, quick overviews, but we won't have time to get through everything if we read what every tradition believed in. But we can say that number theory and certainly a sort of sexual promiscuity, particularly with Marcus and other women, were part of this tradition. Now, another tradition, one that you guys have probably heard of and it's more famous, is the Sethian tradition, the Sethians. And so the Sethians were one of the main currents of Gnosticism during the 2nd and 3rd century CE, along with Valentinianism and Basilidianism. According to John D. Turner, it originated in the 2nd century CE, or I like AD, as a fusion of two distinct Hellenistic Judaic philosophies and was influenced by Christianity and Middle Platonism. However, the exact origin of Sethiism is not properly understood. That is true. So the Sethians are first mentioned along with the Ophites, which we'll get to next. In the 2nd century, Irenaeus, who was obviously antagonistic and what they call pseudo-Tertullian. According to Frederick Wise, all subsequent accounts appear to be largely dependent on Irenaeus. Hippolytus repeats information from Irenaeus. According to Epiphanius, who, again, another early church father who wrote polemically against the Gnostics, Sethians were in his time found only in Egypt and Palestine, but 50 years later, they had been found as far as Greater Armenia. Now, Armenia is going to become a central hub of these Gnostic heresies as we move into the Middle Ages, because once the Roman Empire converts itself to Christianity and moves from Rome to Constantinople, let's say they didn't take too kindly to these heresies. So the shutting down of the Neoplatonic academies and the persecution of Gnostics. So deliberately shutting down schools when they found them, burning their books, and forcing them to either convert to Orthodox Christianity or they got to get the hell out. And so what happened is a lot of Gnostics actually fled to the sort of fringes of the Eastern Roman Empire. Those of you familiar with the Anatolia, where Constantinople is, Anatolia, all through the Mediterranean, that Armenia right there in the Caucasus region is a sort of limbo region right between what was then the Persian Empire. And so Armenia, that's why we find the Tondrakians, which we'll look at, and the Paulicians, which we'll look at, were both Gnostic groups that were quite prominent in Armenia. So like it says, Greater Armenia, which was actually part of Anatolia, just FYI, we'll find that that is a consistent theme. Armenia, unfortunately, was a place where a lot of Gnostics fled to. Philasters of the 4th century in a catalog of heresies places the Ophites, the Cainites, and the Sethians as pre-Christian Jewish sects. However, since Sethians identified Seth or Set with Christ, Philasters' belief that the Sethians had pre-Christian origins other than the syncretic adoption of Judaism and Greek pre-Christian sources has not been accepted by later scholarship. Okay, so we're going to read their general mythology and then we'll move to the next one. Sethianism attributed its gnosis to Seth. Seth, who was Seth? Well, Seth in Judaism and Christianity, Islam, Mandaism, that's another group we're going to get into, and Sethianism was the third son of Adam and Eve and brother of Cain and Abel. The only other child mentioned by name in the Hebrew Bible, according to Genesis 4:25. Seth was born after Abel's murder by Cain. Okay, so that's who Seth is. They believe Seth was Christ. Okay, third son of Adam and Eve. And Norea, wife of Noah, who also plays a role in Mandaeism and Manichaeanism, another group that we're going to look into. The Sethian cosmogonic myth gives a prologue to Genesis and the rest of the Pentateuch, presenting a radical reinterpretation of the Orthodox Jewish conception of creation and the divine relation to reality. The Sethian cosmology is most famously contained in the Apocryphon of John, which describes an unknown God, the same as Paul had done in the Acts of the Apostles in 1723. Many of the Sethian concepts derived from a fusion of Platonic and Neoplatonic concepts with the Old Testament, as was common of Hellenistic Judaism, exemplified by Philo. Philo of Alexandria is who they're referring to there. So again, if you want to look more into their worldview, you can. Theological significance, in addition to the prologue, radically altered the significance of the events in Eden. Rather than emphasizing a fall of human weakness and breaking God's command, Sethians and their inheritors emphasize a crisis of the divine fullness as it encounters the ignorance of matter, as depicted in stories about Sophia. Eve and Adam's removal from the Archon's paradise. Remember, the Archon is their evil devil, which is our God, but that's their devil. The Archon's paradise is seen as a step towards freedom from the Archons. Therefore, the snake in the Garden of Eden becomes a heroic salvific figure rather than an adversary to humanity or a proto-Satan. Eating the fruit of knowledge is the first act of human salvation from cruel, oppressive powers. This is why we see serpent symbolism so common within Gnosticism, because of their promotion of the serpent in the garden. Why? This is partly why Eve, and why you see these prophetesses movements within Gnosticism, is because they totally reinterpreted Eve as not Eve was not like evil for the fall. She was not bad for eating the fruit. In fact, it was a good thing, right? It was a good thing. So they believe that because Eve ate the Adam and humanity fell, therefore she was to be venerated. She was the hero. Now, of course, from Orthodoxy, creation didn't fall when Eve ate the apple. It's when Adam ate the apple. But again, that's a subtlety they don't emphasize. They venerate Eve for eating the apple because Eve becomes the liberator of mankind. She then convinces Adam to do so. You can see these sort of almost feminist presuppositions within Gnosticism right there. Okay, so moving forward here, we can move from Sethianism now into the Ophites. So who are the Ophites? Well, the Ophites were just outright serpent worshipers. Okay, some of you may already be familiar with them. So the Ophites, a group called the Ophites, were a Christian Gnostic sect depicted by Hippolytus of Rome in a lost work. Okay, it is now thought that later accounts of these Ophites by Pseudo-Tertullian, Philastrius, and Epiphanius of Salamis are all dependent on the lost syntagma of Hippolytus. It is possible that rather than an actual sectarian name, Hippolytus may have invented the Ophite as a generic term for what he considered the heretical speculations concerning the serpent of Genesis or Moses. Apart from the sources directly dependent on Hippolytus, Origen and Clement of Alexandria also mentioned the group. The group is mentioned by Irenaeus in his Against the Heresies. So let's see here. Does it talk about... Here we go. Irenaeus gives what seems intended for chronological order, a list of heresies beginning with Simon Magus and ends with Tatian, and adds in a kind of appendix a description of a variety of Gnostic sects deriving their origin, as Irenaeus maintains from the heresy of Simon Magus. Let's see here. Where? Okay. So the Ophites, or again, if you went like the Orphic hymns, well, forget it. We'll just stay here. Um, like here's the brazen serpent illustrated. So what they do is they have a venerative practice regarding the serpent itself. Okay, the Ophites. So if you read some of these against the heresies, one of the things that they talk about is the Ophites would have like they would like be some would voluntarily like be licked by the serpent. So they would perform Eucharistic rituals, of which were not a sanctified, Eucharist from the church. They would, have all types of stuff. We'll get into the Carpocratians and the Borborites would use menstrual blood, fecal matter, aborted babies were eaten, things that we would associate with Satanism, right? And I don't mean the LaVey, like atheistic Satanism. I mean the theistic Satanism. I mean the people who actually believe that they're worshiping Satan and conjuring demons, that the whole thing is the inversion of the right-handed path, so to create the left-handed path. Those forms of Satanism, they practice a sort of inverted Catholic mass. And I've said this before, when I was in Berkeley, one of the girls there was transgender. Her name was Johnny. And she wanted to be identified as a lesbian because she had a girlfriend. So she wanted to be called Johnny and identified with male pronouns, but she also wanted to be referred to as a lesbian because she was against heterosexuality. Okay, it makes sense. However, she was a priestess to a new satanic temple, and they were theistically satanic. They weren't atheistic or just, being satanic to be edgy. They actually believed that they were conjuring demons and rituals and all types of stuff. And they would actively eat. She said it in class. They would eat basically a wafer that would have like urine on it, fecal matter, menstrual blood. And they believed that if they could consume that there's nothing that they couldn't do, that the transgression of those boundaries basically made them more powerful. Okay. So the Ophites were associated with allowing like serpents to lick the Eucharistic bread or whatever they're using. The priests would have serpents like around their neck. The serpents were everywhere. So the Ophites were always associated with like serpent veneration or serpent worship. That's why they bring up the brazen serpent within their worldview. Yeah. So anyways, if you guys want to look more up to that, you can. But that whole serpent veneration, that's essential part of the Ophites. Another school, this is one that, again, I mentioned earlier, the Simonians, right? The Simonians were a Gnostic sect of the 2nd century, which regarded Simon Magus as its founder and traced its doctrines, known as Simonianism, back to him. The sect flourished in Syria and various districts of Asia Minor and at Rome. In the 3rd century, remnants of it still existed, which survived until the 4th century. And so the Simonians, and like I said, remember that Simon Magus was associated with the Simony heresy, right? Oh my gosh. Shout out to Gary. Whoa. Gary throws in $100. Shout out to you, brother. Thank you so very much, man. Gary throws in $100. Thank you very, very, very much, Gary. God bless you, bro. Thank you. And guys, if you like to support, feel free to throw in a super chat. And whether you want to use YouTube, if you do use YouTube, so again, I've always told everybody, use Streamlabs. There we go. Andrew has helped me. Has helped me with the channel and everything. So thank you very much, Andrew. God bless you, bro. Can you guys see what's going on? I'm getting a spinning wheel over on okay. It looks like everything's good. So thank you so much, Andrew, again, for helping me. We're going to get some more emojis going on, but if you guys do want to, share anything, okay. Yep. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, brother. See, I got my new software, and so I can share some of this stuff on the screen here. So if you guys send in a super chat through YouTube, I can bring it up. And if you guys want to comment, one of the things I want to do is answer super chats while I go through the stream. So if you guys want to comment on any of these groups or any of these sacks, feel free to throw something in on YouTube or through Streamlabs, and I'll bring it up on the screen and address it right away, as opposed to just waiting towards the end. So that's something we can do. Anyways, okay, moving forward. So the Simonians. Justin Martyr wrote in his apology that the sect of the Simonians appear to have been formidable, as he speaks 4 times of their founder, Simon. So I believe it is, in my research, I was looking into the Simonians. Why they came up in my research is that the Simonians were noted for using inebriating, intoxicating substances. And so it was either Hippolytus or Irenaeus. I want to say it was Hippolytus of Rome, that in his refutation, he highlighted that there was a noted rituals where the Simonians would engage in what he called a sort of, it was like a wine tincture that clearly, the way he described it, was doing more than just wine, and that they would ritualistically take this. Sometimes they would have group sex. Sometimes they would participate in group rituals. But he highlights that the Simonians were engaging in, that's why it came up in my research on the use of drugs throughout the history of religion, that the Simonians were included, I believe, by Hippolytus. I'd have to double check, by Hippolytus in regards to group inebriation, something that, again, we still see in the Amazon regarding to the ayahuasquero groups. But I wanted to bring that up because that's something that you have to read through Hippolytus, because some of these people don't bring up. The Simonians are mentioned by Hegesippus. Their doctrines are quoted and opposed in connection with Simon Magus by Irenaeus, the Philosophumena, and later the Epiphanius of Salamis. Origen also mentions that some of the sects were called the Helleniani. Okay, origin and development. According to, again, this is where we have to be careful. Again, we're Orthodox Christians, so we're believers. A lot of secular scholarship are not believers. And so the way they view this stuff is a little bit different than the way we view this stuff. But again, we're going to move through. So according to John D. Turner, the Simonians originated as a local Hebrew cult in the 1st century CE, which was centered around a Samaritan holy man. Again, Simon Magus was noted for his incredible magic and already had a sort of cult following, if you will, according to tradition, already found in the book of Acts, when he wants to pay for the Holy Spirit. This early cult was synchronistic, another characteristic we know of Gnosticism, but not Gnostic. In the 2nd century, under influence of Christianity, Simon was transformed into a Gnostic savior. And this is debated. So even though Wikipedia says, this is actually debated among scholars whether that's true or not. The influence of Greek philosophy resulted in a Gnostic monistic theogony. According to Aldo Magris, Samaritan Baptist sects were an offshoot of John the Baptist, of which the Mandaeans are. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Mandaeans. It's actually one of these groups that still exists. Now, the war in Iraq basically wiped out many of these people, but they practice a form of Gnostic religion that can go all the way back to the ancient period. And so it's an offshoot. One offshoot was in turn headed by Dositheus, Simon Magus, and Menander. It was in this milieu that the idea emerged that the world was created by ignorant angels. Their baptismal ritual removed the consequences of sin and led to a regeneration by which natural death, which was caused by these angels, was overcome. The Samaritan leaders were viewed as the embodiment of God's power, spirit, and wisdom, and as the redeemer and reliever of true knowledge. Dositheus, a Samaritan who died from starvation, is said to have originally been the standing one or leader of John the Baptist's sect, but stepped aside in favor of Simon Magus. Origen was ordained priest in AD 231, speaks of Dositheus, and also mentions Simon Magus. As late as the beginning of the 7th century, Eulogius of Alexandria opposed Dositheans and regarded Dositheus as the great prophet foretold by Moses. Like Simon Menander, who was a pupil, and after Simon's death, his most important successor, taught the creation of the world by angels who were sent by the Enoia. He asserted that men received immortality and the resurrection by his baptism and practiced magical acts. The sect named after him, the Menandrians, continued to exist for a considerable length of time. Simonian influences continued through Menander's own followers, who included Saturnius of Antioch and Basilides, later identified with Irenaeus with the development of his predecessor's ideas. Carpocrates practiced in the tradition of Basilides, and his own follower Marcellina became one of the few female leaders of early Christianity in 2nd century Rome. So again, I told you that these Gnostic groups privileged some of the women. It's like an early form of feminism. Okay, so we can see some of this stuff. You guys want to read more, just go look for the Simonians. So the next group are the Borborites. Now, the Borborites is actually a term that they did not refer to themselves as. It comes from, I believe, Irenaeus, who calls them Borborite, and it comes from a word, so the Greek word Borboros, meaning mud. The name Borborites can therefore be translated as the filthy ones. Why are they called the filthy ones? Well, according to both Irenaeus and Hippolytus, the Borborites engaged in eating disgusting things. What do I mean? Like they literally ate, as I said, wafers with fecal matter, urine, menstrual blood. Again, the same thing that theistic Satanists do today, the Borborites were accused of doing in the ancient period. And so we have church fathers that accuse the Borborite. That's why we don't know what they called themselves. The Borborites is a term, a very aggressive term characterizing them as mud eaters, filthy ones. They were, according to the church, they were disgusting people. They would do disgusting acts. The Borborites are also the ones that were accused of eating an aborted child. Again, if you talk to some of the secular scholars, they say, oh my gosh, that didn't happen. Irenaeus and Hippolytus, they're just totally exact. I don't know. Maybe they were exaggerating, but according to them, these filth eaters would eat things that were disgusting because they believed in this hedonistic, as I said, the worldview, not of asceticism, but by transgressing these boundaries, they became, quote unquote, more empowered. Okay. So the Borborites or the Borbians were a Christian Gnostic sect said to be descended from the Nicolaitans. Okay. It is difficult to know for sure the practices of the group, as both Epiphanius and Theodoret were opponents of the group. According to Epiphanius, the sects were libertines who embraced the pleasures of the earthly world. So it could have been Epiphanius that I wrote, or I'm pretty sure it was Tertullian. Also speaks about some of these people, or what they call pseudo-Tertullian, who knows. But yeah, what we do know is that according to the church fathers, the way that they believe the Borborites, these were filthy, disgusting people that would participate in these very transgressive rituals. Okay, so and unlikely to be the term used by the sect themselves. Yeah, they didn't call themselves Borborites. It was a condescending term used by others to describe them. The name Codian is claimed by Epiphanius to derive from the Aramaic term for a dish or bowl. Excuse me. J.J. Buckley writes that the likely root kuda refers to both Syriac Aramaic and Mandaic Aramaic as a hemorrhage after both of the call and the fetus of a fetus, suggesting the reference to a bowl to be euphemistic. Okay. Here we go. Sexual sacramentalism. Epiphanius claims that the Borborites were inspired by Sethianism and that elements of sexual sacramentalism formed an important role in their rituals. He asserts that the Borborites engaged in a version in the Eucharist in which they would smear their hands with menstrual blood and semen and consume them as the blood and body of Christ, respectively. He also alleges that whenever one of the women in their church was experiencing her monthly period, they would take her menstrual blood and make everyone in the church eat it as part of their sacred ritual. Yes, see, I told you. That's why they were called the filth eaters, the Borborites. The Borborites were also said to extract fetuses from pregnant women and consume them, particularly if the woman accidentally became pregnant. Because what I said, matter is evil, and so they were against procreation. that the woman accidentally became pregnant during sexual rituals. Buckley notes that this implies treatment of an aborted fetus as strayed semen and would serve to prevent it from developing into another body for the archon's clutches. And I believe he even says again they ate the aborted baby. So these are disgusting practices. Okay, that's why they were called the filth eaters. All the church fathers refer to them as Borborites, which again, the filth eaters. So that's the Borborites. Another group, the Carpocratians. Now, this group also practiced sexual rituals. So the Carpocratians, one of the things levied against them, I don't know if it's in the Wikipedia article. No, it's probably not. Is that Carpocratians engaged in homoerotic rituals. So the Carpocratians, again, Carpocrates is their leader. So there is no page on the Carpocratians, but the Carpocratians were the followers of Carpocrates. Is here. Carpocrates of Alexandria was the founder of an early Gnostic sect from the first half of the 2nd century. As with many Gnostic sects, one knows of the Carpocratians only through the writings of church fathers, especially Irenaeus of Lyons and Clement of Alexandria. As these writers strongly opposed Gnostic doctrine, there is a question of negative bias when using the source. While the various references to the Carpocratians differ in some details, they agree on the libertinism of the sect, a charge commonly levied by pagans against Christians, and conversely by Christians against pagans and heretics. And so these were not filth eaters. We're going to read what Irenaeus says, but one of the things that we do know that they did is the sexual rituals. So according to the church fathers, the Carpocratians would engage in open sexual rituals, swingers, if you will. They would potentially come to rooms, turn the lights off. Everybody would be naked, and it would be like an orgiastic frenzy. And according to the church fathers, men would sleep with men, women with women, men with wives of other men. And so it was adulterous. It was homoerotic. The earliest and most vivid account of Carpocrates and his followers comes from Irenaeus and against the heresies, including an account of the theology and practice of the sect. They believe, he writes, that Jesus was not divine, but because his soul was steadfast and pure, he remembered those things which he had witnessed within the sphere of the unbegotten God. So we see the Arian Christology and the sort of Christ consciousness, right? He became divine through his secret gnosis. Because of this, Jesus was able to free himself from the material powers, what other Gnostics call archons and the demiurge. Carpocratians believed they themselves could transcend the material realm and therefore were no longer bound by Mosaic law, which was based on the material powers, or by any morality, which they held as mere human opinion. So again, a sort of antinomianism. There are no moral structures. There is no universal law. And actually the transgressing of these things was powerful, empowered you. Irenaeus offers this belief as an explanation for their licentious behavior. Well, what was their licentious behavior? Irenaeus then goes on to provide his further, slightly different explanation. The followers of Carpocrates, he says, believe that in order to leave this world, one's imprisoned eternal soul must pass through every possible condition of earthly life. Therefore, bend over, your friend needs to sodomize you. Moreover, it is possible to do this within one lifetime. As a result, the Carpocratians did all of those things which we dare not either speak or hear of, so that when they died, they would not be compelled to incarnate again, but would return to God. Irenaeus says that they practice various magical arts as well as leading licentious lives. He also says that they possessed a portrait of Christ, a painting they claim to have been made by Pontius Pilate during his lifetime, which they honored along the images of Plato, Pythagoras, and Aristotle in the manner of the Gentiles. Some early Christian authors opposed representational art, and statues and portraits and sculptures are crude and stylized. According to Robin Lane Fox, only one group of the early Christians. No, that's not true. So again, that's where, again, female secular scholars, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, that's enough. These are the Carpocratians. Their thing, they didn't eat fecal matter, but they engaged in orgies and all types of crude forms of sexuality. Okay. So that's the Carpocratians, their followers, Carpocrates. Here's another one. The Basilidians. The Basilidians were a Gnostic sect founded by Basilides of Alexandria in the 2nd century. Basilides claimed to have been taught his doctrines by Glaucus, a disciple of St. Peter, though others stated he was the disciple of Simonian in Menander, which is more likely the case. Because you see, one of the things with these Gnostic groups, along with all these Gnostic gospels, is they wanted to find some type of connection back to the apostles, some type of apostolic connection. And so they would always, I'm tied to Mary, gospel of Mary. I'm tied to Judas, the gospel of Judas. I'm tied to Peter, the gospel of Peter. No, you weren't. And often these books, at least these Gnostic books, almost the vast majority are between like the 2nd and 4th century that they're written. So yeah, anyways, of the customs of the Basilidians, we know no more than the Basilides enjoyed one of his followers like Pythagoras a silence of 5 years. They kept the anniversary of the day of the baptism of Jesus as a feast day. They spent the eve of it in reading that their master told them not to scruple eating things offered to idols. The sect had 3 grades: material, intellectual, and spiritual, and possessed 2 allegorical statues, male and female. The sect's doctrines were often similar to those of the Ophites and later Jewish Kabbalah. Basilidianism survived until the end of the 4th century, as Epiphanius knew of Basilidians living in the Nile Delta. It was, however, also exclusively limited to Egypt, though according to Sulpicius, it seems to have founded an entrance into Spain through a certain Mark of Memphis. St. Jerome states that the Priscillianists were infected with it. And we're going to get to them. That's another Gnostic group, the Priscillians. We're going to get to that in just a moment here. Shout out to our man, The Metal Mystic, throws in $5. He says, have you read the Gnostic Jung and 7 Sermons of the Dead? I found it researching my next vid. Wild stuff. Basilides plays a central role. Read the Gnostic Jung. I have not read the Gnostic Jung. Now, I have a handful of Jungian books. Basically, everything Jung wrote about Christianity, I have those books. But if the actual book is The Gnostic Jung, let me look it up. I have not heard of The Gnostic Jung. The Gnostic Jung, if this is a book. Yeah, The Gnostic Jung and the 7 Sermons of the Dead. I have not read this. I have not read this book. Gnosticism Together with Alchemy. So let me show you guys what I'm looking at here. I always use, unfortunately, Amazon. So here's what our brother sent in. Shout out again to the Metal Mystic. So this book is Gnosticism Together with Alchemy. Was C.G. Jung the chief prefiguration of his analytical psychology? Jung did not simply interpret Gnostic texts psychologically, but also cited them with confirmation of his psychology. Oh, yeah, I've not read that, Metal Mystic. I may have to check that out. So thank you very much, brother, for sharing that. And thank you so much, man, for sending in a super chat. Guys, if you'd like to support the stream, please throw in a super chat. I'd greatly appreciate it. Or you can use the Streamlabs link as well. That's always that always works. Okay, so let's continue here. So we have Basilides. Thank you again, the Metal Mystic, for highlighting that. Everybody check out the Gnostic Jung, 7 Sermons of the Dead. Okay, so yeah, we'll move on here from Basilides, Basilidians. Again, if you guys want to look up more of this, you can. So magic, as I know from my understanding, Basilides, they were very much into magic ritual. So among the followers of Basilides, magic, invocations, and all other curious arts played a part. It's a very central part, okay? The names of the rulers of several heavens were handed down as a weighty secret. Secret knowledge and secret names. Where have we seen that before? Which was the result of the belief that whoever knew the names of these rulers would, after death, pass through all the heavens to the supreme God. Yes, because that's what it's a memory test. Do you know the names? You know the names? Okay, now you can go to heaven. In accordance with this, Christ also, in the opinion of these followers of Basilides, was in the possession of a mystic name. by the power of which he had descended through all the heavens of earth and had then again ascended back to the Father. Redemption, accordingly, could be conceived as the revelation of mystic names. Whether Basilides himself had already given this magic tendency to Gnosticism cannot be decided. A reading taken from the inferior MSS of Irenaeus has added that further statement to be used that images and this single word is often cited in corroboration with the popular belief that the numerous ancient gems of which grotesque mythological combinations were accompanied by the mystic name. Okay, so yeah, so you guys get it. You guys get it. Okay. Rigovich, shout out to Rigovich, throws in £4. He says, "Did you check out Klaus Kenneth? Love your channel." Well, thank you so much, Rigovich. God bless you, bro, and thank you. I have not reached out to Klaus Kenneth yet, but I will, bro. I wrote that down actually. I have it written down right here. Klaus Kenneth, from the Jay Dyer stream when we did on ecumenism. I'm going to reach out to him. So Klaus Kenneth, former, as you said, Tibetan Buddhist, we'd have a lot to discuss. And in fact, there's a lot of interesting esoteric stuff with Tibetan Buddhism. So thank you very much, Rigovich, for the £4. And I absolutely will be reaching out to Klaus Kenneth. I have not checked out his content yet, but I have it written down as a to-do. So I will absolutely do that. Thank you so much, Rigovich, for the £4. God bless you, brother. Okay, so now we just did the Basilidians. Now let's go to the Archontics. Oh, the Archontics, huh? Yeah, so the Archontics were a Gnostic group that existed in Palestine, Syria, and Armenia, who arose towards the end of the mid 4th century AD. They were thus called in the Greek the Archontes, or the principalities, or the rulers, by reason that they had held the world to have been created and ruled by malevolent archons. Epiphanius of Salamis seems to be the earliest Christian writer who speaks of this sex. He relates that a young priest in Palestine named Peter had been charged with heresy, deposed from the office of the priesthood, and expelled by Bishop Aetius. He fled into parts of Arabia, where there was a center of Ibiantism, which again, that's another Gnostic group that we're going to bring up here in just a sec. In his old age, he returned to Palestine, where he lived the life of an Archonite in a cave near Jerusalem and attracted followers by his austerity of his life and practice of extreme poverty. Shortly before the death of Constantius II, Eutychus, coming from Egypt, visited the Archonite Peter and was imbued him with the doctrines of the sect and carried them into Greater and Lesser Armenia. Okay, beliefs. The Archonites held that there were 7 heavens, ruled by the demiurge, surrounded by archons, begotten by him, who were the jailers of the souls. In the 8th heaven dwells the supreme mother of light. The king or tyrant of the 7th heaven is Sabaoth, the god of the Jews, who is the father of the devil. The devil, dwelling upon earth, rebelled against his father and opposed him in all things. And by Eve begot Cain and Abel. Cain slew Abel in a quarrel about their sister, whom both loved. Oh, so incest. They say, records Epiphanius, that the soul is the food of the archons and powers without which they cannot live, because she is of the dew from above and gives them strength. When she has become imbued with knowledge, she ascends to heaven and gives a defense before each power, thus mounts beyond them the upper mother and father, and all hints that came down to this world. Again, you almost get like Mormon type stuff, like Seventh-day Adventist stuff. But anyways, we'll move on. So that is the Archontics, the Archonites. Next one is Marcionism. Now, some of you guys are going to be already more familiar with Marcionism. Marcionism was an early Christian dualistic belief system that originated with the teachings of Marcion of Sinope in Rome around the year of 144. Marcion was an early Christian theologian, evangelist, and an important figure in early Christianity. He was the son of the bishop of Sinope in Pontus. About the middle of the 2nd century, he traveled to Rome, where he joined the Syrian Gnostic Credo. Marcion preached that the benevolent God of the gospel, who sent Jesus Christ into the world as the Savior, was the true supreme being, different and opposed to the malevolent demiurge or creator God identified with the Hebrew God of the Old Testament. He considered himself a follower of Paul the apostle, whom he believed to have been the only true apostle of Jesus Christ. Marcion's canon, possibly the first Christian canon ever compiled, consisted of 11 books, a gospel, which was a shorter version of the Gospel of Luke, and 10 Pauline epistles. Marcion's canon rejected the entire Old Testament. Along with many of the epistles and gospels, which would become the 27 books of the New Testament canon, which during his life had yet been compiled. Pauline epistles enjoy a prominent position in the Marcionite canon, since Paul was considered by Marcion to be Christ's only true apostle. Marcionism, denounced by its opponents as a heresy and written against by the early church fathers, notably by Tertullian in his 5-book treatises adverse against Marcion. In about 208, Marcion's writings are lost, though they are widely read by numerous manuscripts must have existed. Even so, many scholars claim it is possible to reconstruct and deduce a large part of ancient Marcionism through what later critics, especially Tertullian, said concerning Marcion. Okay. So Marcionism, that's why, like Joseph P. Farrell, who wrote, again, this really prominent book, who was Orthodox, went to St. Vlad's for a short time. He was a student of Father John Meyendorff. Well, Joseph P. Farrell is now a Gnostic because he adopts a Marcionite understanding of Scripture. So he also believes that the God of the Old Testament of the Jews is different from the God that sent Jesus Christ. So that is Marcionism in a roundabout way. Next heresy are the Cainites. The Cainites. Shout out to somebody I saw before. Somebody I saw, they said, "Oh, are you going to bring up the Cainites?" I, in fact, am. So here are the Cainites. They were a Gnostic and antinomian sect known to venerate Cain as the first victim of the demiurge, the deity of the Old Testament, who was identified by many groups of Gnostics as evil. The sect was relatively small. They were mentioned by Tertullian and Irenaeus as existing in the Eastern Roman Empire during the 2nd century. One of their purported religious texts was the Gospel of Judas. So the Cainites, again, if you read the Gospel of Judas, which claims that Jesus actually went to Judas and said, "Judas, you're my best apostle. You know my secret knowledge. I gave you all the secrets. And so because of that, Judas, I'm going to ask you to turn me in." And so the betrayal of Judas, according to the Gospel of Judas, was Jesus wanted Judas to do this because this was necessary for him to die on the cross and do all this stuff. So the Gospel of Judas was written by these people right here, Cain and Abel. Irenaeus states that the Cainites regarded Cain as derived from the highest God, not the creator God worshipped by Jews and other Christians. According to Irenaeus, they claimed fellowship with Esau, Korah, and men of Sodom, and all such people, and regarded themselves as persecuted by the creator, but they escaped injury from him because they were protected by the goddess Sophia. Epiphanius of Salamis, who appears to have some source of information independent from Irenaeus, gives a much longer account. He describes Abel as having been derived from the weaker principle. And so if you guys want to look into their, again, Judas, they regarded Judas, the traitor, as having full cognizance of the truth. Like I said, he had the secret. Again, anybody reads the Gospel of Judas, Judas is held to be like the apostle who had all the secret knowledge. Jesus loved him, which according to tradition, Jesus loved John. John was the youngest, and John was his favorite. And when Christ was on the cross, he gave Mary, his mother. John was in charge of looking after her, right? He, therefore, rather than other disciples, was able to accomplish the mystery of the betrayal and so bring about the dissolution of all things, both celestial and terrestrial. The Cainites possessed a work entitled the Gospel of Judas, and Irenaeus says that he had himself collected writings of theirs where they had advocated that the work of hysteria should be dissolved. By hysteria, they meant the maker of heaven and earth. There's no doubt that they applauded the action of Judas in the betrayal, but authorities differ as to the motive which prompted him. The view that Judas, through his more perfect gnosis, penetrated the wish of Jesus more successfully than others and accomplished it by bringing him to the cross, through which he effected redemption, is only one of them. Epiphanius also says that Judas forced the archons and rulers against their will to slay Christ, and thus assisted us in the salvation of the cross. Philaster, on the other hand, assigns the action of Judas to his knowledge that Christ intended to destroy the truth. But Christ was the truth, a purpose which he frustrated by the betrayal. Okay, so that's the Cainites. You can see that they were venerative. They wrote the Gospel of Judas. They had a totally different interpretation of Christ's betrayal and redemption. Okay, the next one, the Euchites. The Euchites. How many of you guys have ever heard of this group? The Euchites, or the Messalians, as I've also heard them regard to, were a Christian sect from Mesopotamia that spread in Asia Minor. The name Messalian comes from the Syriac Messalana, meaning one who prays. The Greek translation of the Euchites meaning the same. They were first mentioned in the 370s by Ephraim the Syrian and Epiphanius of Salamis and Jerome. They are also mentioned by Archbishop Atticus, Theodotus of Antioch, and Archbishop Sicinus. They were condemned as heretical in the Synod at 383, whose acto was referred to as the works of Photius. Their leader was supposedly a man named Peter, who claimed to be Christ. Before being stoned to death for his blasphemies, he promised his followers that after 3 days he would rise from his tomb in the shape of a wolf, attracting the title of Lycopetrus, or Peter the Wolf. Christians believed it was not Peter who would come out of the grave, but a devil in disguise. They continued to exist for several centuries, influencing the Bogomils of Bulgaria. So the Bogomils were the Gnostic group that basically controlled Bulgaria before they became Orthodox, who are called the Lycopetrians in abjuration formula in 1027, and thereby the Bosnian Church, also heretical, and Catharism, also heretical. By the 12th century, the sect had reached Bohemia and Germany, and by a resolution of the Council of Tyre was condemned as heretical. So we're seeing one moving from the ancient period into the medieval period. Michael Pacellus, a Byzantine monk, accused Bogomils and Euchites of orgiastic practices such as incest and homosexuality. Not uncommon for some of these Gnostics. Furthermore, he argued that children born from these promiscuous activities were brought before a satanic assembly for 8 days, offered up to Satan, and then cannibalistically eaten. The cannibalistic act was supposedly a parody of baptism. Similar accusations have a long history and is debated by historians if they are truthful to any degree. Euthymos is another source of these accusations. The idea that these unholy acts can be tracked back to the alleged practices of certain Gnostic sects. A similar literary tradition regarding heresy seems to have been brought into existence already during the reign of Seleucid ruler Antiochus IV. So, yeah. Okay. So the Euchites, again, orgiastic, practicing very weird things. Very, very weird things. Next one, Priscillianism. So Priscillianism was a Christian sect developed in the Iberian Peninsula under the Roman Empire in the 4th century by Priscillian. It is derived from the Gnostic doctrines taught by Marcus, an Egyptian from Memphis. So remember, Marcus was the group that was noted for, that Irenaeus said was a group of like silly women. And Marcus was the one who was noted for basically sleeping with men's wives to gain spiritual knowledge. They had like this weird ritual that Marcus and this is for a handful of these Gnostic groups, that they would have like ritualistic sex to like recreate creation. They had all this weird stuff. So it is derived from the Gnostic doctrines of Marcus, an Egyptian from Memphis. Priscillianism was later considered a heresy by both the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. Marcus, a native of Memphis in Egypt, came to Spain and taught Gnostic theories. Two of his followers, a Spanish woman named Agape and the rhetorician Helpidius converted Priscillian, who was a layman of noble birth, of great riches, bold, restless, eloquent, and learned through much reading, very ready to debate and discussion. Through his oratorical gifts and reputation for extreme asceticism, Priscillian attracted a large following, including Helpidius, Herlepidus, and two bishops. They established a new sect and oath-bound society, attracting attention. Let's see here. So the Priscillianists taught a Gnostic doctrine of dualism, a belief in the existence of two kingdoms, one of light and one of darkness. Angels and the souls of men were said to be served from the substance of the deity, or severed, I'm sorry. Human souls were intended to conquer the kingdom of darkness, but fell and were imprisoned by material bodies. Both kingdoms were represented in man. Their conflict was symbolized on the side of light by the 12 patriarchs, heavenly spirits, which corresponded to certain of man's powers, and on the side of darkness, the signs of the zodiac, the symbols of matter of the lower kingdom. And the salvation of man consists in liberation from the domination of matter. The 12 heavenly spirits, having failed to accomplish their release, the Savior came in a heavenly body that appeared to be that of other men. Through his doctrine and his apparent death, he released the souls of the men from the influence of earthly matter. Okay, so again, you guys can look more into that if you want. Okay, so that is Priscillianism. Again, an offshoot of of Marcus and his school. The Colarbasians. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, the Colarbasians. In Gnostic Christian religious history, the Colarbasians were supposed sect of the 2nd century, deemed heretics, so-called. Their leader, Calabrisus, a disciple of Valentinus. Calabrisus, along with Marcus, another disciple of Valentinus, was said to maintain the whole plenitude and perfection of truth and religion to be contained in the Greek alphabet, and that it was for this reason that Jesus was called the Alpha and the Omega. We got a super chat in here. Ethan Faber throws in $5. Shout out to Ethan Faber. Thank you so much, brother, for the $5 super chat. He says, ex-Gnostic catechumen. When researching orthodoxy 1 year ago, someone online sent me your and Paggio's channels. Thank for your work. Glory to God. Well, thank you so much, Ethan Faber. God bless you, bro. Appreciate the support. Thank you so much, man, for the $5 super chat. And glory to God, man. I was caught up in all the Gnosticism stuff. I had my whole spell in it. So glory to God that we both got out of it, right? So thank you so much, Ethan Faber, for the $5 super chat, and that you have found the beauty of holy orthodoxy. Once you find orthodoxy and you had all these life experience and these spirituality, I think everything just makes a little bit more sense. So thank you so much, Ethan, brother, for the support. God bless you, man. So the Colarbasians, the name first occurs that only incidentally in a solitary passage of Irenaeus, which has been the subject of much discussion. This Marcus then declaring, this is Irenaeus writing, declaring that he alone was the matrix and receptacle of the siege of Calabrisus, inasmuch as he was only begotten, has brought to the birth, in some such way as followers that which was committed to him and the defective Enthymius. Marcus, Irenaeus seems to say, boasted that he alone has become the womb and receptacle of the siege. Okay, sorry, I just had to do something real quick. The offspring to which he gave birth being the statement and revelation recorded afterwards. There is no previous mention of Calabrisus. Irenaeus has his 6 pages been speaking of Marcus alone. 11 pages back, he refers briefly to a certain other illustrious teacher of theirs, Valentinus, but there's no coincidence of doctrine and nothing to suggest that the nameless or obscurely named Epiphanes heretic was himself Calabrisus, as some have supposed. So, yeah. Anyways, if you guys want to read more about them, feel free. Next heresy next are the Ebionites. So the Ebionites, a little bit more Jewish here. The Ebionites, meaning the poor or poor ones, was a term referred to a Jewish Christian sect which viewed poverty as a blessing. They existed during the early centuries of the Common Era, or after Christ's death. The Ebionites embraced an adoptionist Christology, thus understanding Jesus of Nazareth as a mere man who, by virtue of his righteousness and following the laws of Moses, was chosen by God to be the messianic prophet like Moses. A majority of the Ebionites rejected as heresy the Orthodox Christian beliefs that Jesus' divinity, virgin birth, and substitutionary atonement, and therefore maintained that Jesus was born the natural son of Joseph and Mary, sought to abolish animal sacrifices by prophetic proclamation, and died as a martyr in order to move all Israel to repentance. Interesting. Shout out to our sister Rachel Wilson becomes a member of the COTEL crew. Thank you so much, Rachel. God bless you. I truly do appreciate it. Thank you so much, sister, for being a member. Again, shout out also to Shaunaverse and shout out to Sung Kim for becoming members. God bless you all. Thank you so freaking much. So thank you so much, Rachel. Really appreciate the support. God bless you and Andrew. And again, and thank your husband for helping me with the emojis. So she says, I love the custom emojis. Well, thanks to your husband. So thank your husband for that. I know I do. So thank you guys very, very much. Special shout out to Rachel Wilson. Thank you so much, Rachel, for helping me out. Thank you so much for becoming a member. Again, all you guys, if you'd like, becoming a member will get you access. I got more emojis coming. I promise. And I'm going to upgrade the ones I have. They're going to look even better. So thank you guys so much. Special shout out to Rachel Wilson. Thank you so much, Rach. Shout out to Shaunaverse. And thank you very much, Sung Kim, for becoming members today. I truly do appreciate it. Continuing on here, beyond voluntary poverty, the Ebionites were said to practice religious vegetarianism. Remember, vegetarian. I said this was going to come up. Actually, we're going to see this more as we move through. Vegetarianism and ritual bathing. They insisted on the necessity of following the written law in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Used some of all the Jewish Christian gospels, such as the Gospel of the Ebionites, find that here, as additional scripture to the Hebrew Bible, and revered James the Just as an exemplar of righteousness and the true successor of Jesus rather than Peter, while rejecting Paul as a false apostle and an apostate from the law. Since historical records of the Ebionites are scarce, fragmentary, and disputed, much of what is known or conjectured about them derived from the church fathers, who saw certain Jewish Christians as Ebionites and confused different groups in their polemics, whom they labeled heretical Judaizers. Consequently, very little about the Ebionite sect or sects is known with certainty, and most, if not all, statements about them are speculative. The church fathers considered the Ebionites identical with other Jewish Christian sects, such as the Nazarenes. Okay, so again, if you guys would like to read a little bit more, they were certainly a very interesting group. We know quite a bit more about them than some of the other groups. Yeah, so that is the Ebionites. Again, more of a Jewish sect. Basically, it's almost like what is the Hebrew roots movement? The Hebrew roots movement. In a way, they're kind of like the Gnostic Hebrew roots, if you will, right? They're the Gnostic Hebrew roots. So okay, moving on here. The next one is the Seleucians or the Seleucians. The Seleucians were an ancient Gnostic sect who were said to have flourished in Galatia. They derived their name They derived their name from a Seleucus, who, with a certain Hermias, is said to have propounded and taught their beliefs. According to Philostratus, the teaching of these beliefs were based on the crudest form of dualism. They were maintained that
God was incorporeal, they asserted that matter was co-eternal with him. They exceeded the usual dualistic tenets in attributing evil to God as well as to matter. And their system, the souls of men were not created by God, but were formed from earthly components, fire and air, by angels. Christ, they said, did not sit at the right hand of the Father in heaven because he hath set his tabernacle in the Son. Must be interpreted to mean that Christ left his body in the Son, the actual SUN. They did not practice baptism, basing their refusal to do so on the words of John the Baptist, Matthew 3:1. He shall baptize you in the Holy Ghost and fire. By hell, they understood this present world, while resurrection they explained as being merely the procreation over death with the expectation of a glorious immortality. The doctrines of Seleucus and his adherents were the source of another series of doctrines taught by some of their disciples who called themselves Prolinianites. These later rejected the dogmas of the resurrection and last judgment. According to Philostrius, they perverted large numbers. A great deal of uncertainty exists regarding the history and real cause of the fact that the doctrines of the Seleucians so closely resembled those of the Hermogenes. And because Hermogenes is not mentioned by Philostrius, conclude that these two were one of the same system of belief. This assumption is plausible, but there are vital differences between the teachings of Hermogenes and that of the Seleucians, as, for example, on the subject of Christ as creator, which, together with the virgin birth, was admitted by Hermogenes. If any weight is to be attached to a method of chronology, which seems rather arbitrary, the date assigned by Philostrius to the Seleucians after the reign of Decius would exclude the supposition that he confounded them and his followers of Hermogenes. Okay. So that is the Seleucians. The next one, the Encratites. The Encratites. The Encratites were an ascetic 2nd century sect of Christians who forbade marriage and consoled abstinence from meat. So we see, again, no procreation, and they were totally in favor of vegetarianism. Again, I told you these general tendencies we were going to see over and over again. Eusebius says that that Tatian was the author of this heresy. It was supposed that it was these Gnostic Encratites who were chastised in the epistle of 1 Timothy, verse 4, 1 through 4. Let's read that. Let's read that real quick. Let's see what we get. Okay. Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter time some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies of hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry and condemning to abstain from meats, which God hath created and received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth. For every creature of God is good, and nothing is to be refused if it be received with thanksgiving. Okay, well, that does make sense why this group would be referenced there. The early mention of a Christian sect by the name occurs with Irenaeus. They are mentioned more than once by Clement of Alexandria, who says that they are named from temperance. Hippolytus of Rome refers to them as acknowledging what concerns God and Christ in like manner with the church. In respect, however, in their mode of life, passing their days inflated with pride, abstaining from animal food, being water drinkers, and forbidding to marry, estimated cynics rather than Christians. On the strength of their passage, it is supposed that the Encratites were perfectly orthodox in doctrine and erred only in practice. Origen says that they did not acknowledge St. Paul's epistles. Well, that would be a big no-no. So here's another one called the Encratites that I'm sure most of you guys have never even heard of. If you want to know more, just search and find it there. Mandaism. Now, this is a really interesting, this is the group that I said still exists. Now, their numbers, as this one says, is 60,000 to 100,000. I've heard that it's less than 60,000. This is considered a Gnostic sect that exists in Iraq, and so a lot of them got killed during the Iraq War. But here it is, sometimes also known as the Sabianism, is a Gnostic, monotheistic, and ethnic religion. Its adherents, the Mandaeans, revere Adam, Abel, Seth, Enos, Noah, Shem, and Aram, and especially John the Baptist. The Mandaeans consider Adam, Seth, Noah, Shem, and John the Baptist prophets, with Adam being the founder of the religion and John being the greatest and final prophet. That is the interesting thing about the Mandaeans. They're all about baptism, and they're all about John the Baptist, that they actually revere John the Baptist as incredibly, incredibly high. The Mandaeans speak an Eastern Aramaic language known as Mandaic. The name Mandaean comes from the Aramaic manda, meaning knowledge, within the Middle East, but outside their community, the Mandaeans are more commonly known as the Suba or the Subi, or as the Sabians. Their term Suba is derived from an Aramaic root word related to baptism. The term Sabians derived from the mysterious religious group mentioned 3 times in the Quran. The name of this unidentified group, which is implied in the Quran to belong to the people of the book, was historically claimed by the Mandaeans as well as by several other religious groups in order to gain legal protection as offered by Islamic law. Occasionally, Mandaeans were also called Christians of St. John. According to Jeroen Jacobson Buckley and other scholars who specialize in Mandaeism, Mandaeans originated about 2,000 years ago in Palestine region and subsequently moved east due to persecution. Others claim that a southwest Mesopotamian origin. However, some scholars take the view that Mandaeism is older and dates back to a pre-Christian times. Now, that is a bit iffy, but I have seen that. Mandaeans assert that their religion predates Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as a monotheistic faith. Mandaeans believe that they are the direct descendants of Shem, Noah's son, in Mesopotamia. And they also believe that they are the direct descendants of John the Baptist, original Nestorian Mandaean disciples in Jerusalem. The core doctrine of the faith, known as the Nesurta, with the adherents called the Nesorai, the Nesorians, and not Nestorians, but the Nesorians, are divided into 2 groups, the priesthood and the laity. The latter derive from their knowledge of the Manda. Okay. The religion is primarily practiced around the lower Karun, the Euphrates, and the Tigris, and the rivers that surrounded the Shat al-Arab waterway, part of the southern Iraq and the Khuzestan province in Iran. Worldwide, there are believed to be around 60,000 to 70,000 Mandaeans. Until the Iraq War, almost all of them lived in Iraq. Many Mandaean Iraqis have since fled their country because the turmoil created by the 2000 invasion of Iraq and subsequent occupation by U.S. armed forces and the related rise of sectarian violence by extremists. By 2007, the population of Mandaeans in Iraq had fallen to approximately 5,000. The Mandaeans have remained separate and intensely private. Reports of them and their religion have come primarily from outsiders, particularly from Julius Heinrich Petermann, an Orientalist, as well as from Nicholas Safui, a Syrian Christian who was the French vice consul in Mosul in 1887. Okay. So this is a very interesting group. Let's see here. Yeah. Anyways, if you guys want to look more, there's quite a bit on the Mandaeans. They still exist. So this religion, this Gnostic religion from the ancient period, is actually still in existence. And so you guys can check this out if you would like. It's fairly pretty interesting. It's one of the few that are still alive. The Ecclesiae, the Elcitis, the Elcisates. There we go. The Elcisates, gosh, some of these are hard to say. The Elcisates were an ancient Jewish Christian sect in Lower Mesopotamia. Then the province of the Asoristan and the Sasanian Empire. that was active between 100 and 400 AD. The members of this sect, which originated in the Transjordan, performed frequent baptisms for purification and had a Gnostic orientation. The name of the sect derives from the alleged founder, the hereseies. And so we have Hippolytus and Eusebius talked about them. We'll just read a quick thing right here. Hippolytus of Rome records that in the time of Pope Calixtus, a Jewish Christian called Alcibiades came to Rome, bringing a book which he said had been revealed in Parthia by a just man named Eclasi. According to him, the book had been revealed by an angel of 96 miles. Okay, so a ginormous angel. This giant angel was the Son of God, who was accompanied by his sister, the Holy Ghost, and the same dimensions. He announced that a new remission of sins had been proclaimed in the year of Trajan, and he decided a baptism which should impart the forgiveness even to the grossest sinners. Okay. Hippolytus recounts that Alcibiades teaches that natural birth, preexistence, and reincarnation of Jesus, which Louis Ginsburg suggested in 1906, may relate to the concept of the Adam Kadmon, which is obviously a Kabbalistic notion, and that he teaches circumcision and the law of Moses. Hippolytus then goes on at length to describe the group's teaching on baptism for all sins of impurity, even against nature. A second baptism is joined in the name of the great and most high God, in the name of the Son and the great King. So not in the Trinity, as you can see, with an adjuration of the seven witnesses written in the book. One has been bitten by a mad dog is to run to the nearest water and jump in it with all clothes on, using the foregoing formula and promising that the seven witnesses that he will abstain from sin. Okay, so you guys can check that out if you want to learn more about that group. That is the Cessites, the Cessites. Okay. Next one is Bardaisan, the Bardaisans. Okay. Known in Arabic as Ibn Dyson, the Latin or the Bardacenes was a Syriac-speaking Assyrian and Parthian Christian writer and teacher of a Gnostic with a Gnostic background. The founder of the Bardacenites, a scientist, scholar, astrologer, philosopher, hymnographer, and poet, Bardaison was also renowned for his knowledge of India, on which he wrote a book now lost. According to the early Christian historian Eusebius, Bardaison was at one time a follower of the Gnostic Valentinus, but later opposed Valentinian Gnosticism and also wrote against Marcionism. Bardason is said to have converted Prince Abgar to Christianity, and even if he did not, he had an import share in Christianizing the city. Both king and philosopher labored to create the first Christian state. However, while he showed great literary activity against Marcion and Valentinus, Bardaison himself went to create on his own heterodox Christian dogma by mixing it with doctrines with Babylonian astrology. Other commenters say his philosophy ended up resembling those of Valentinus, if not adhering to them completely. Epiphanius of Salamis and Bar Hebraeus assert that he was the first in Orthodox. He was first an Orthodox Christian and afterwards an adept Valentinus. As a Gnostic, he certainly denied the resurrection of the body, and so far as we can judge by the obscure quotations of his hymns furnished by Ephraim, he explained the origin of the world as a process of an emanation from the supreme God, which he called the Father of the living. His teachings form the basis of Manichaeanism and later of the Batini sects of Shia Islam. Okay, so we're going to see more of the Manichaeans here soon. I don't know when that is. Don't know where I have those. Wonder if, why don't we just pull that up now? So the next one, let's get into the Manichaean. So Manichaeanism, this is basically a radically dualistic Persian. This is from well, he considered himself a prophet. We don't consider him a prophet, but Mani, the prophet Mani, who is Parthian in the Sasanian Empire. Manichaeanism is another syncretic dualistic religion that venerates the Buddha, Jesus, and Zoroaster. So Manichaeanism teaches an elaborate dualistic cosmology, the struggle between good, spiritual world of light and evil, material world of darkness. Through an ongoing process that takes place in human history, light is gradually removed from the world of matter and returned to the world of light, whence it came. Its beliefs are based on local Mesopotamian religious movements and Gnosticism. It reveres Mani as the final prophet after Zoroaster, Gautama Buddha, and Jesus. Manichaeanism was quickly successful and spread far through the Aramaic-speaking regions. It thrived between the 3rd and 7th centuries, and at its height was one of the most widespread religions in the world. Manichaean churches and scriptures existed as far east as China and as far west as the Roman Empire. It was briefly the main rival to Christianity in the competition to replace classical polytheism before the spread of Islam. Under the Roman dominate, Manichaeanism was persecuted by the Roman state and was eventually stamped out in the Roman Empire. Manichaeanism has survived longer in the East than it did in the West. Now, I told you there's evidence that the Manichaeans practiced these rituals where they would consume mushrooms. And according to Chinese sources, they were red and white mushrooms. Amanita muscaria, sounds like it. And so, again, on my research, trying to document the utilization of inebriating substances, most specifically psychedelic drugs, most specifically mushrooms and various plants. The Manichaeans are, in fact, a group that many psychonauts and scholars that promote all this stuff, they claim that indeed the Manichaeans were practicing some of those rituals. So they had a reputation for how much the Manichaeans loved mushrooms. They loved mushrooms. Although it was thought to have finally faded away in the 14th century in South China, contemporary to the decline of the Church of the East in Ming China, there is a growing corpus of evidence that shows Manichaeanism persists in some areas of China, especially in Fujian, where numerous Manichaean relics have been discovered over time. The currently known sects are notably secretive and protective of their belief system, which has aided in them being relatively undetected. This stems from the fears relating to persecution and suppression during various periods in Chinese history. While most Manichaeanism's original writings have been lost, numerous translations and fragmentary texts have survived. An adherent of Manichaeanism is called a Manichaean. Okay, so if you guys want to read more, again, it's a very syncretic, dualistic worldview. So when we talk about dualism, you'll often hear people talk about Manichaeanism and Gnosticism. This is an incredibly dualistic worldview. So you guys can check that out if you like. The next one is the Valesians. The Valesians were a Christian sect that advocated self-castration. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? It sounds like people in our world today, right? So the Valesians were a Christian sect that advocated self-castration. The sect was founded by Valens, not to be confused with the Roman emperor of the same name, an Arabian philosopher who established the sect sometime in the 2nd century AD. They were notorious for forcibly castrating travelers whom they encountered and guests who visited them. Yikes. They are known chiefly in the Panarion of Epiphanius of Salamis, which describes how disciples of the sect were not allowed to eat meat. Oh, sound familiar? Until they had been castrated. Because those who were not castrated might be tempted to lust by eating certain foods. According to the Panarion, their views on authorities and powers were similar to those of Sethianism and the Archontics. Their doctrine was condemned as a heresy and the Synod of Achaia in approximately 25 AD. The sect appears in the Temptation of St. Anthony by Flaubert. Okay. Next group, that's the Valesians. The next group is Heracleon. Heracleon was a Gnostic who flourished around AD 175, probably in the south of Italy. He is described by Clement of Alexandria as the most esteemed of the school of Valentinus, and according to Origen, said to have been in personal contact with Valentinus himself. He is barely mentioned by Irenaeus and by Tertullian. The common source of Philaster and Pseudo-Tertullian contained an article on Heracleon between those on Ptolemaeus and Secundus and on Marcus and Calabrisus. In his system, he appears to have regarded the divine nature as a vast abyss in whose pleroma were aeons of different orders and of degrees, emanations from the source of being, midway between the supreme God and the material world as the demiurgos, who created the latter and under whose jurisdiction the lower animal soul of man proceeded after death, while his higher and celestial soul returned to the pleroma whence it was first issued. He seems to have received in ordinary Christian scriptures, and Origen, who treats him as a notable exegete, has preserved fragments of a commentary by him on the fourth gospel, while Clement of Alexandria quotes from him what appears to be a message from a commentary on Luke. These writings are remarkable for their intensely mystical and allegorical interpretations of the text. Okay, so again, you guys can dive in a little bit more if you will. This is on Heracleon. Heracleon, another Gnostic group. Okay, next one is Ptolemy, Gnostic, right? Ptolemy. Guys, I just want to say, please smash that like if you guys could. I would greatly appreciate it. I hope everybody's enjoying this stream. And if you would like to show some love, feel free to become a member or send in a super chat. I'd greatly appreciate it. So Ptolemy the Gnostic was a disciple of the Gnostic teacher Valentinus, something we keep seeing over and over. That's why I began with Valentinus and the Valentinian school. Incredibly, incredibly influential. So he was a disciple of Valentinus and is known for the letter to Flora, an epistle he wrote to a wealthy woman named Flora, herself not a Gnostic. Ptolemy was probably still alive. No other details are known about his life. Harnack's suggestion is that he's identical with Ptolemy, spoken by Justin Martyr, is as yet unproved. It is not known when Ptolemy became a disciple of Valentinus, but Valentinus was active in the Egyptian city of Alexandria and in Rome. Ptolemy was, with Heracleon, the principal writer of the Italian and Western school of Valentinian Gnosticism, which was active in Rome, Italy, and southern Gaul. So there we go. Another school, Ptolemy the Gnostic and Western Valentinian Gnosticism. Now, the next one, Sardonians. So Sardonians. The Sardonians were a Gnostic sect found by Cerdo, a Syrian who came to Rome in about 137, but concerning whose history little is known. They held that there are two first causes, the perfectly good and the perfectly evil. The latter is also the creator of the world, the God of the Jews, and the author of the Old Testament. Jesus Christ is the Son of the God of the good deity. He was sent into the world to oppose the evil, but his incarnation and therefore his sufferings were a mere appearance. Regarding the body as the work of the evil deity, the Sardonians formed a moral system of great severity, prohibiting marriage, again, procreation, wine, and the eating of flesh, and advocating fasting and other austerities. Most of the church fathers narrate of Cerdo's tenets has probably been transferred to him from his famous pupil Marcion, like whom he is said to have rejected the Old Testament and the New, except a part of Luke's Gospel and Paul's epistles. Okay, so that is the Sardonians, another Marcionite group. Next one is Justin Gnostic. So Justin or Justinus was an early Gnostic Christian from the second century, recorded by Hippolytus. He's often confused with Justin Martyr with Justin Martyr, but he is Justin the Gnostic. His life is unknown, although he likely came from a Jewish Christian background. Most information about him comes from Hippolytus, who might have been familiar with Justin's most important work. He is counted among the earliest Gnostics, having lived in an era of the Simonians and Simon Magus. We'll just say a little bit of his teaching. His teachings synthesized the gospel called the Book of Baruch, where a highly syncretic Gnostic current that mixed Jewish Christianity with classical mythology. They are considered one of the first transitions between Jewish monotheism and full-blown Gnosticism, even though it contains substantial differences with posterior Gnosticism, most particularly presenting the creation of the world as a positive light. According to Justin, there were three primordial eternal entities. Reigning supreme was the male good one, owner of foreknowledge, the monad, under which there were the male Elohim, a demiurge, and the female Edom, or Gaia, identified with Gaia. Oh, does that sound familiar to contemporary spirituality? I would say so. Elohim and Edom, ignorant of the existence of the good one, fell in love and copulated. Oh my gosh, giving birth to 24 angels of both parental and maternal nature, also creating the world in the process. Those angels then created mankind out of Edom's human part and the animal kingdom out of the snake's part. However, Elohim discovered the good one and ascended to heaven, where he was charged to stay to redeem himself from having thought himself the greatest. Dominion over the earth was thus assigned to Edom, who, vengeful and heartbroken by Elohim's departure, released the evils of famine and disease on the world. Her 12 angels ruled the world as archons. Okay, so this is Justin the Gnostic. Again, if you guys want to learn more, you can do so. Next group is the Cerinthus. Cerinthus was an early Gnostic. Who is Cerinthus? Here we go. Cerinthus was an early Gnostic who was prominent as a heresiarch in the view of the early Christian church. Yeah, so he was heretical. Contrary to the church fathers, he used the gospel of Cerinthus, so his own gospel, and denied that the supreme God made the physical world. In Cerinthus' interpretation, the Christ descended upon Jesus at baptism. So you see Jesus and Christ, two separate things, something you still see in the New Age, and guided him in ministry and performing of miracles, but left him at the crucifixion. Similarly, the Ebionites, he maintained that Jesus was not born of a virgin, but was a mere man, the biological son of Mary and Joseph. Early Christian tradition describes Cerinthus as a contemporary to and opponent of John the Evangelist, who may have written the first epistle of John and the second epistle of John to warn the less mature in faith the doctrine about the changes. Cerinthus was making the original gospel. According to the early Christian sources, the Apostle John wrote the gospel specifically to refute the teachings of Cerinthus. All that is known about Cerinthus comes from the writings of his theological opponents. Okay, what are some of his beliefs? We do not have a fully developed understanding of his teachings. The earliest surviving account is that of Irenaeus, of which is written. Okay, yep. Okay. Cerinthus distinguished between the man of Jesus and the Christ. He denied the supernatural virgin birth of Jesus, making him a biological son of Joseph and Mary, and taught that the Christ descended upon him in the form of a dove from the supreme ruler of the baptism, an adoptionism that is common in Gnosticism, and left him again at the crucifixion. Describing Jesus as a natural-born man, Cerinthus agreed with the Ebionites in portraying Christ as a spirit that came from heaven, undertook its divine task in the material world, and then returned. He anticipates the fully developed Christian Gnosticism in later decades. Irenaeus numbers Cerinthus among those Gnostics who denied that Jesus was the Logos, the Word of God. Okay, so that is Cerinthus and his followers. Next one are the Arnoldists. You guys ever heard of them? The Arnoldists were a proto-Protestant Christian movement in the 12th century, named after Arnold of Brescia, an advocate of ecclesiastical reform who criticized the great wealth and possessions of the Roman Catholic Church while preaching against infant baptism and transubstantiation. His disciples were also called publicans or poplicans, or poplicans. I don't know. I think it's poplicans, a name probably deriving from Paulicians. The term publicani would be generally used for any heretic, even a political traitor through Europe. The Arnoldists were condemned as heretics by Pope Lucius III. Their tenets would later be addressed by Bonarchus of Milan in 1190 in their manifesto Hereseies Cathorum, which refuted Arnoldist apostolic poverty and the incapacity of sinful priests to administer the sacraments. So interesting. The Arnoldists were a group that was a proto-Protestant Christian movement. Isn't that funny? A proto-Protestant Christian movement. The Arnoldists. How many guys have heard of them? All right. The next one, or we already did the Marcosians, didn't we? We already did the Marcosians. Who's next? Bogomilism. Oh, this is a good one. You guys got it. You got to know about the Bogomils. This is really good. The Bogomils. We got another super chat. Shout out to Charisma Mysterion. Throws in $10. Shout out to you, Charisma Mysterion. God bless you. And thank you so much for the $10 super chat. He says, have you read From the Bodies of the Gods by E. Lee? And if so, what are your thoughts on the research presented? Blasphemous, as you ask me, but it's directly related to this presentation. No, I have not read that book. Let me pull this up. From the Bodies of the Gods. From the Bodies of the Gods. Okay. From the Bodies of the Gods, E. Lee. Here we go. Oh, Earl Lee. From the Bodies of the Gods, Psychoactive Plants and the Cults of the Dead. Ooh, I have not read this, bro. This is good, though. This is something I need to know about. The Origins of Modern Religion and Human Sacrifice, Ritual Cannibalism, Very Visionary Intoxication, and the Cult of the Dead. Explores ancient practices of producing sacred hallucinogenic foods and oils from the bodies of dead for ritual consumption and religious anointing. Explains how these practices are deeply embedded in symbolism and sacraments, modern religion, specifically Christianity and the Eucharist. Documents of the cults of the dead, the Minoans of Crete, the Egyptians, and Christian sects such as the Cathars. Yeah. Well, this is the thing, brother. I haven't read this, but I want to check this out. I need to put this on. Let me add this to my list. Yeah. Okay. Added to shopping list. Okay. One of the things that I've noticed with doing so many of these, looking further and further into Gnosticism, is the people who kind of document this, they want to, whether it be John Marco Allegro, right? He translated the Dead Sea Scrolls. He wrote The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. Famous text arguing that Jesus Christ was in fact a mushroom, right? I do not believe that Jesus Christ was a mushroom, but this idea to take instances in which people used mushrooms or, used intoxicating substances, they want to equate this as like, well, this is what Christianity was doing. This is what the Eucharist is. No, this is what Gnostic practices were. Often these writers, and I don't know about Earl Lee. I have to check this out, brother. I do appreciate it. But often these practices are, they just naively equate it with everybody. So all Christianity was doing this. This is true for all of Christianity. No, it's never true for all of Christianity, but their lack of sophistication makes these claims. So I don't know if he's doing the same thing, because to equate the Cathars as Christian, now the Cathars were persecuted during the Inquisition. So he highlights the Christian sects as the Cathars. Well, the Inquisition killed the Cathars, the Albigensians, which we'll get to here in a few. So I'm going to put that over here for later. So thank you so much for bringing that up, brother. I was not aware of that book, but I do appreciate you bringing it to my attention. Thank you very much. So shout out to Charisma Mysterion for the $10 super chat. And thank you so much, brother, for being a member. I truly do appreciate it. Shout out to you and yours. All right, continuing on here. So now we get to Bogomilism. And Bogomilism, this is something, again, we've probably gone through 20 some heresies now. But this one is one you should remember. Just like the Sethians or the Thomasines, Bogomilism characterized a whole period of Bulgarian history. Bogomilism was a Christian neo-Gnostic sect and dualist sect found in the First Bulgarian Empire by the priest Bogomil during the reign of Tsar Peter I in the 10th century, and most probably arose in the region of, I can't pronounce that, Kunmishvesta, today part of the region of Macedonia. The Bogomils called for return to what they considered to be early spiritual teaching, rejecting the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Their primary political tendencies were resistance to the state and church authorities. This helped the movement spread quickly in the Balkans, gradually expanding throughout the Byzantine Empire and later reaching the Kievan Rus, Bosnia, the Bosnian Church, which had Gnostic elements, Dalmatia, Serbia, Italy, and France. And so I talked to you about how the Cathars, who we'll get to, the Cathars, who again, I argue are the basis of this book here, the Gnostic Gospels, that all these evidences of like Christian mushroom use, well, there's a considerable amount of evidence that this comes from the Cathars. The Cathars were a Gnostic group that infiltrated Western Europe. They sort of, again, they set up shop basically in southern France and southern Germany, northern Italy. They were greatly influenced by the Bogomils and the Paulicians, this Gnostic group from Armenia. They eventually kicked out and they go to Bulgaria and they take up shop here with the Bogomils in Bulgaria. So just FYI. The Bogomils were a dualist or Gnostics in that they believed in a world within the body and a world outside the body. They did not use the Christian cross nor build churches, as they revered their gifted form and considered their body to be the temple. This gave rise to many forms of practice to cleanse oneself through purging, fasting, celebrating, and dancing. I want to get to... Yeah. So for Bogomils, the Logos was not the second person of the Blessed Trinity, but merely the spoken word of God shown in the oral teachings of Christ. Although Bogomils regarded themselves as Trinitarian, anathemas against the Bogomils charged Bogomils with the rejection of the Trinity. In the Bogomil and Cathar text, the Secret Supper, the book starts with, "In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, Amen." Again, and so mushroom use can also be found in relation to this Gnostic group. The Gnostic social religious movement and doctrine originated at the time of Peter I of Bulgaria, alleged in the modern day to be a reaction against the state and clerical opposition of the Byzantine Church. In spite of all measures of repression, it remained strong and popular until the fall of the Second Bulgarian Empire at the end of the 14th century. Bogomilism was an outcome of many factors that had arisen from the beginning of the 10th century, most probably in the region of Macedonia. It was also strongly influenced by the Paulicians, who had been driven out of Armenia, which I've already said. Remember, I just said the Paulicians were driven out of Armenia. Okay. So much of their literature has been lost or destroyed by the contemporary Christian churches. The earliest description of the Bogomils is in a letter from the Patriarch of Theophylact of Bulgaria to Peter I. The main source of the doctrinal information is the work of the Euthemius of Zigabinus, who says that they believe that God created man's soul, but matter was the invention of Satan. God's older son, who is seducing Eve, lost his creative power. Concerning the Bogomils, some can be gathered around the polemic against the newly appeared heresy of the Bogomils, written in Slavonic by Cosmos the priest, a 10th century Bulgarian official. The old Slavonic lists of forbidden books in the 15th and 16th century also give us a clue to the discovery of this heretical literature and the means of the Bogomils employed to carry on their teachings. Much may also be learned from the doctrines of the numerous variations of Bogomilism which spread in medieval Kievan Rus in the 11th century. Okay. So that's the Bogomils. Again, a very influential, important group let me get the Paulicians next. We need to do the Paulicians next. Here we go. Paulicianism. Okay, let's do the Paulicians now. So Bogomils, Paulicianism. This is the heretical group that I said came from Armenia. So Paulicianism, the followers of Paul, was a medieval Christian sect which originated in Armenia in the 7th century. So we're talking about late antiquity now. We're entering late antiquity, and they were incredibly influential into the medieval period where they got persecuted, pushed out of Armenia. But for a period of time, they ruled Armenia. So the Oriental Orthodox Church over in Armenia, for a period, the Paulicians, they basically took over and ruled probably from about the 600s through the 700s. Once you get into the 800s, I think the persecution started to ramp up. But the Byzantine Church was not in favor of these people. So, okay. They were a medieval Christian sect which originated in Armenia in the 7th century. Followers of the sect were called Paulicians and referred to themselves as good Christians. Little is known about the Paulician faith, and various influences have been suggested, including Gnosticism, Marcionism, Manichaeanism, and Adoptionism, with other scholars arguing that doctrinally the Paulicians were a largely conventional Christian reform movement unrelated to any of these currents. The founder of the Paulicians is traditionally held to be an Armenian by the name of Constantine, who hailed from a Syrian community near Samsat in modern-day Turkey. Now, again, we know that Syria at that point and parts of Turkey already had strong Gnostic communities at that point. The sect flourished between 650 and 872. See, so I was right on around the Byzantine Empire's frontier with the Arab Caliphate in Armenia and Eastern Anatolia. Despite the intermittent persecutions and deportations by the imperial authorities in Constantinople, after a period of relative toleration, renewed Byzantine persecution in the 9th century prompted the Paulicians to establish a state centered in Tefriki in an Armenian borderlands under Arab protection. After prolonged warfare, the state of Tefriki, or Tefrike, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, maybe it's Tefrike, was destroyed by the Byzantines in the 870s. Over the next century, some Paulicians migrated into Armenia, while others were relocated by the imperial authorities to the Eastern Balkans frontier in Thrace. That's where the Paulicians get moved over into the Bogomil territory. In Thrace, in Armenia, the Paulicians were assimilated into related religious movements of the Tondrakianism, which we'll get into in just a minute, the Tondrakians, over the next century. In Thrace, the sect continued practicing their faith for some time, in some places until the 17th and 18th centuries, before gradually converting to the religions and are considered to be the ancestors of modern-day Roman Catholic Banat Bulgarians and Muslim Pomaks. The movement may have been an influence on medieval European Christian heterodox movements such as the Bogomils and the Cathars. Absolutely. And so there's a whole thing. We actually, I have a book over here. It's actually quite expensive. Here, I'll grab it real quick. It's actually kind of there's no point for me to grab it, but there is a book that is basically the book on the Paulicians by an Armenian scholar named Nina. I forget her name's Nina something, but she's kind of the ultimate scholar on Armenian Gnosticism, and she wrote the absolute most fantastic book. I think she wrote it in the 60s on the Paulician heresy, Gnostic heresy. I do have that book over there, and it's really, really well and academic. So she did great work. Shout out to Nina. So they called themselves the True Believers and referred to Orthodox Christians as Romanists. The name Paulician was used by outsiders to refer to the sect and literally means the followers of Paul. The identity of Paul, for whom the movement was named, is disputed. Another possible source is Paul the Armenian, an otherwise obscure Paulician figure said to have led the sect in migration to Episporus following the persecution of Justinian II at the close of the 7th century. Okay, so you guys, again, can go read more about it. The Paulicians self-identified as Christians, but much about the nature of their beliefs is disputed. Their beliefs prompted Christian critics to brand them as Jews, Muslims, and Manichaeans, but it is likely that their opponents employed these pejorative appellations merely as terms to abuse rather than as an accurate reflection of their beliefs. Controversies about the sect's faith include disputes over their beliefs regarding the nature of God, the nature of Christ, and the devotional rituals and practices. Yeah. So from my understanding, again, reading Nina's book, they are in fact Gnostics. So it's not like they were just good Christians that had a pejorative name. They were Gnostic. They had a dualistic worldview, and they had certainly heretical understandings of Christology and the Godhead and salvation related to all that. So that's part of the problem. Now, again, I told you that these Armenian Paulicians who got pushed really into Armenia because the Byzantine Empire wasn't having it. And so Armenia became a place where the Tondrakians and the Paulicians, both considered Gnostic groups, kind of flourished. And eventually then they get pushed over back to Bulgaria where they have the Bogomils, and the Bogomils and the Paulicians kind of mingle together. And then what's believed is that those groups moved into southwestern Europe, and that is Catharism. So the Cathars are sort of blending of the Bogomils and the Paulicians. So Catharism was a Christian dualist or Gnostic movement between the 12th and 14th centuries, which thrived in southern Europe, particularly in northern Italy and southern France. Followers were described as Cathars and referred to themselves as good Christians, something, again, we saw the Paulicians do and the Bogomils. In modern times, they are mainly remembered for a prolonged period of religious persecution by the Catholic Church, which did not recognize their unorthodox Christianity. Catharism emerged in Western Europe in the region of southern France in the 11th century. Adherents were sometimes referred to as Albigensians after the French city of Albi, where the movement first took hold. Catharism was initially taught by ascetic leaders who set first guidelines, leading some Catharist practices and beliefs to vary by region and over time. The movement was greatly influenced by the Bogomils of the First Bulgarian Empire and may have originated in the Byzantine Empire, namely through adherents of the Paulician movement in Armenia and Eastern Anatolia, who were resettled in Thrace. Among the most notable and controversial beliefs of the Cathars was the idea of two gods or deistic principles, one good and the other evil. So an immense dualism. We talked about how some of these groups so far were monistic. The Cathars were not. They were explicitly dualistic. The Catholic Church asserted that this was antithetical to monotheism, a fundamental principle that there is only one God who created all things visible and invisible. And as stated in the Nicene Creed, Cathars believed that the good God was the God of the New Testament, creator of the spiritual realm, whereas the evil God was the God of the Old Testament. Again, a Gnostic motif that we've seen over and over. Creator of the physical world, whom many Cathars identified as Satan. Cathars believed human spirits were the sexless spirits of angels trapped in the material realm of the evil God, destined to be reincarnated until they achieved salvation through the consolamentum, a form of baptism performed when death is imminent, when they would return to the good God as perfect. The Catholic Church denounced Cathar practices, particularly the consolamentum ritual. From the beginning of his reign, Pope Innocent III attempted to end Catharism by sending missionaries and persuading the local authorities to act against them. In 208, Pierre de Castellanu, Innocent's papal legate, was murdered while returning to Rome after excommunicating Count Raymond of Toulouse, who, in his view, was too lenient with the Cathars. Some claim that Roman was, in fact, a Cathar. Pope Innocent III then abandoned sending Catholic missionaries and jurists, declared Pierre a martyr, and launched the Albigensian Crusade in 209, which they basically went and destroyed this group of people. And that's why it fled. And there's instances of some of these churches that have the mushroom symbolism appearing in the 13th century. So the later 1200s or even the 1300s, which might be Cathars who fled the Inquisition. The nearly 2-year campaign succeeded in vastly weakening the movement. The medieval Inquisition that followed ultimately eradicated Catharism by 1350. There is academic controversy about whether Catharism was a real or organized movement, or whether the medieval church imagined or exaggerated it. The lack of any central organization among Cathars, regional differences in beliefs and practices, as well as the lack of sources from the Cathars themselves, has prompted some scholars to question whether Catharism existed. It did exist. And I'll tell you, the ultimate, if you guys want to know the ultimate book on medieval Christian heresies, it's this one right here by Walter Weeken and Austin P. Evans. This book right here is really, really, really good. So Heresies of the High Middle Ages. And this one pretty much goes in detail about the role of the the role of the Cathars in their belief system. So, and that's all using basically primary sources. So that's what's so great about the heresies of the High Middle Ages. It's an academic work that basically only deals with primary sources. Really good stuff there. So you guys can definitely check that out. And though the term Cathar has been used for centuries to identify the movement, whether it has identified itself with that name is debated. In Cathar texts, the terms good men, good women, good Christians are the common terms of self-identification. And so again, they're a blending of the Bogomils and the Paulicians, which we've already discussed. So again, definitely an important group to know about. The Passagians. So the Passagians, another Gnostic group. The Passagians, also spelled Passagians or Passagani or Passagini, were a religious sect which appeared in Lombardy in the late 12th and early 16th century and possibly appeared much earlier in the East. The Summa Contra Hereticos, ascribed to Pripostinus of Sermona, describes the Passagians as retaining the Old Testament rules on circumcision, kosher foods, and the Jewish holidays. In other words, they observed the law of Moses except in respect to sacrifices, and thus also were given the name circumci. They considered Christ the highest created being and a demiurge, by whom all creatures were brought into being, citing both the Old and New Testaments in support for their doctrine. They were accused of preaching a form of subordinationalism, teaching that Christ was created being and less than the Father. As late as the 11th century, Cardinal Humbert of Silva Candida referred to the sect of Nazarenes, a Sabbath-keeping Christian body existing at that time. Modern scholars believe that Humbert was referring here to the Passagini, and such groups as the Nazarene sect existed well into the 11th century and before. The writings of Bonacursus, entitled Against the Heretics, is a chief authority on their history. Following report is found in the work of Gregory of Bergamo in 1250 against the Cathars and the Passaginians. Quote, after what has been said of the Cathari, there still remains the sect of the Passagini. They teach Christ to be the first and pure creature, that the Old Testament festivals are to be observed, circumcision, distinction of foods. Moreover, in nearly all of matters, save the sacrifices, Old Testament is observed as literally the new. Circumcision is to be kept according to the letter. They say that no good person before the advent of Christ ascended into the lower regions, and that there is no one in the lower regions and in paradise until now, nor will there be until sentence has been rendered on the day of judgment. As to the origin of the Passagians, most church historians suppose that they have come from the East. Neander expresses himself as follows. Among the sects, the Oriental origin belongs, perhaps besides those already mentioned, the Passagini or the Passagili. The name of the sect reminds one of the word passagium or passage, which signifies a tour and was very commonly employed to denote pilgrimages to the East, the Holy Sepulchre, crusades. May not this word then be regarded as an indication pointing to the origin of the sect as one that came from the East, imitating that it grew out of the dealings with Palestine? May we not suppose that from very ancient times a party of Judaizing Christians had survived, of which this sect must be regarded as an offshoot? The way in which they express themselves concerning Christ as being the firstborn creation would point also more directly as the connection of the connection of their doctrine with some old Jewish theology than that of a purely Western origin. So that is the Passagians, and also another Gnostic group. Next one, Nicolaism. And so Nicolaism was an early Christian sect mentioned twice in the book of Revelation in the New Testament. The adherents were called Nicolaitans. They were considered heretical by the mainstream early Christian church, according to Revelation 2, 6, and 15. They were known in the cities of Ephesus and Pergamum. in this chapter, the church of the Ephesus is endorsed for hating the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. And the church of Pergamos is rebuked. So thou hast also some worshiping in the midst who hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Several of the early Christian fathers mentioned this group, including Irenaeus, Tertullian, Hippolytus, Epiphanius, uh, Theodoret, stating that Nicholas the deacon, one of the seven, was the author of the heresy in the sect. Okay. Again, they were into polygamy. Bede states that Nicholas allowed other men to marry his wife. Thomas Aquinas believed that Nicholas supported either polygamy or the holding of wives in common. Eusebius claimed that the sect was short-lived. So we see polygamy as another Gnostic practice. All right, this is Nicolaism. Next one is the Athenagoni. So the Athenagoni, Gonoi, the Athenagoni. Okay, were a Manichaean sect regarded as Judaizing heretics who lived in Phrygia and Laconia, but were neither Hebrews nor Gentiles. They kept the Sabbath, but were not circumcised. They were Shomer Nagia. Other sources mentioning the Athengonoi were Simonians. It had nothing to do with the Manichaean or Polycynic sect, and settled in the year of the East-West Schism in 1054 at Byzantium, and married Byzantine women and adopted Greek Orthodox Christianity, and later assimiled into the Slavonic and Greek population. In some studies, the Athengonoi are described as remnants of the Indo-Greeks who left India in 400 AD during the migration period. So that's actually a pretty interesting group that many people have never heard of. So shout out to, or not shout out, but here is the Athengonoi. Athengonoi. Next one is the Bagnolians. So the Bagnolians were a sect of the 8th century deemed heretical, who rejected the Old Testament and part of the New Testament. They held the world to be eternal and affirmed that God did not create the soul when he infused it into the body. They derived their name from the Bagnols, a city in France. Their doctrine generally agreed with that of the Manichaeans. So that is the Bagnolians, another Gnostic group. The Bosnian church, as I told you earlier, remember the Bosnian church influenced by the Bogomils there in that region. The Bosnian church was a Christian church in medieval Bosnia that was independent of and considered heretical by both the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox hierarchies. Historians traditionally connected the church with the Bogomils, although this has been challenged and is now rejected by the majority of scholars. Adherents of the church called themselves simply Christians. Or good Bosnians, right? So again, I think that there is evidence that they were influenced by the Bogomils, so I disagree with the majority of scholars. The church's organization and beliefs are poorly understood because few, if any, records were left by church members, and the church is mostly known for the writings of outside sources, primarily Catholic ones. The monumental tombstones called the Stekak that appeared in medieval Bosnia, as well as Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro, are sometimes identified with the Bosnian church. Shout out to Dean Lim 2. Dean Lim 2 throws in $4.99, no comment. Thank you so much, Dean Lim 2, for the super chat. God bless you. Thank you very much. I truly do appreciate it. Okay, so again, this is the Bosnian church. If you want to read more about them, feel free. My throat's getting parched literally from speaking so much. And we still have, I think, 10 more heresies to go through. So, okay, that is the Bosnian church. Feel free. There's actually quite a bit on the Bosnian church if you guys want to do academic research on that. Okay. The Tondrakians, which I promised to you guys, the Tondrakians. The Tondrakians were members of an anti-feudal heretical Christian sect that flourished in medieval Armenia between the 19th century and the 11th century, and centered on the district of Tondrak, north of Lake Van in western Armenia. We got another super chat. Throws in from our friend Charisma Mysterion, throws in $2 and says, any parallels of quantum physics and Gnosticism? Well, oh boy, I'm glad you asked a very simple question when my mouth is getting very dry and parched. Quantum physics. Well, one of the things with quantum physics that I'm very skeptical of some of the stuff that's coming out of quantum physics myself. And so one of the things that I think would definitely connect is the multiverse theory. So the multiverse theory is a way to maintain the eternality of creation, right? Remember, for almost all these Gnostics, many of these Gnostics, that when Yaldabaoth or the demiurge creates material, it's in a sort of like eternal dualistic competition with the spiritual realm. For like Plato and many of the Greeks, they believed in an eternal creation because they didn't have an ex nihilo creator. Obviously, that was a Jewish belief in regards to Genesis and our understanding of Genesis. So, any parallels with quantum physics? Well, I think quantum physics allows people to maintain a pagan worldview through like multiverse theory. It allows to have like a semi-scientific spiritual worldviews. For example, if you read books on like Esalen, the Esalen Institute over in Big Sur, California, their whole thing is basically talking about spirituality in regards to quantum mechanics. So the idea of like non-locality, that particles or things can affect each other at a distance. This relates to concepts of theurgy and magic, which certainly would connect back to like Gnosticism and Neoplatonic theurgy and, magical processes. So all that stuff, I think would definitely connect. How much for at the same time, I kind of want to, remember many of these Gnostic groups were very antagonistic towards matter. So would contemporary quantum physics say bad things about matter? Not really. So I think there is some elements, there are some parallels, but I think it's not as clean as it could be. So, okay. So again, our beloved Dr. Crispy Johnson says, Happy Patrick's Day, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day. That is my name day, obviously. So I think I'm going to try to do a St. Patrick's stream tomorrow night for those that are here. But again, following our beloved Dr. Crispy Johnson, happy St. Patty's Day, St. Patrick's Day, my favorite Saints Day, of course, my name day. But I think I'm going to do a stream tomorrow. So happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody out there. God bless you all. Okay, let's keep going. I got to get through the rest of these, man. Okay, the Tondrakians. Woo. Background. In the 10th century, many regions of Armenia were undergoing peasant uprising, which also first began in forms of open social protest, eventually adopting religious aspects. Contemporary historians and eyewitnesses describes how the peasants of Ararat fought against their feudal lords and landowners, destroying their castles and property. Peasant revolt appeared also in Sunik. After the construction of Tetev Monastery was completed in 906, the ownership of the adjacent villages was transferred by a special princely edict to the monks of the monastery, flatly refusing to obey the edict. The peasants of Tersurabed, Tamalek, all these different villages. With the aid of Sambat, the prince of Siunik, the monastery managed after a while to take control. The struggle to take control bore a bloodier nature, and here the peasants attacked the monastery and plundered it. Sambat eventually suppressed the uprising. However, after a short while, the people of Tasserbird revolted again. So this led to the widespread acceptance of the Tondrakian movement among the lower classes people of the 10th century. And that is generally believed that Tondrakian movement did not have a sort of elite profile. It was a sort of religion of the poor people. Beliefs. The 10th century Armenian theologian and monk Gregory of Narek wrote a critical summary of Tondrakian doctrines in his Letter of the Abbot concerning the refutation of the accursed Tondrakians. They deny our ordination, which the apostle received from Christ. They deny Holy Communion as the true body and blood of Christ. They denied baptism as being mere bath water. They considered Sunday as on level with other days. They refused genuflection, so they wouldn't bow, they wouldn't prostrate. They deny the veneration of the cross. They ordain each other and thus allow self-conferred priesthood. They do not accept marriage as a sacrament. They reject the matah as being Jewish practice, and they are sexually promiscuous. So, and that is, yeah, the general case. So again, all of which we found in all these previous Gnostic heresies. The next ones, the Taborites. How many of you guys ever heard of the Taborites? So the Taborites, let's zoom in. There we go. The Taborites, known by their enemies as the Picards, were a faction within the Hussite movement in the medieval lands of the Bohemian Crown. Although most of the Taborites were of rural origin, they played a major role in the town of Tabor. The Taborite politics were also encroached upon by their priests. The most important Taborites included the governors of Jan Zizica of Trokonov. Yeah, anyways, a handful of names that I cannot pronounce. The main center of the association. Overview. Okay, the Taborites were centered in the Bohemian town of Tabor during the Hussite Wars in the 15th century. So we're talking about the 1400s here. The religious reform movement in Bohemia splintered into various religious acts. Besides the Taborites, these included the Adamites and the Orborites. So the Adamites were another group here. I don't know if I had them in here. Early Christian group in North Africa, 2nd and 4th centuries, that wore no clothing during their religious services. There were later reports of similar sects in Central Europe in the late medieval ages. Ancient Adamites. The obscure sect, dating probably in the 2nd century, professed to have regained Adam and Eve's primeval innocence. Various accounts are given on their origins. Some have thought of them to have been an offshoot of the Carpocratian Gnostics. Remember the Gnostics that performed all the sexual orgies and homoeroticism, who professed a sensual mysticism and a complete emancipation of the moral law. Theodoret held his view of them and identified them with the licentious acts whose practices are described by Clement of Alexandria. Others, on the contrary, consider them to have been misguided ascetics who strove to extirpate carnal desires by a return to simpler manners and by the abolition of marriage. Okay, so that was the Adamites. I just want to highlight that because I didn't know if I had that in there. Okay. Because the impetus of these movements came from the burning of John Huss, it became common practice to label them all Hussites. The Taborites' theology represented a departure from that of medieval Catholic Church. They rejected the corruption of the church and insisted on the normativeness of biblical authority. Even though the Taborite theologians were versed in scholastic theology, they were among the first intellectuals to break free from centuries-old scholastic methods. So in a way, we already see another Protestant-esque movement. Now, for those of you I've never heard of the Hussites, this is actually very important. So the Hussites were a Czech proto-Protestant Christian movement that followed the teachings of reformer John Huss, who became the best-known representative of the Bohemian Reformation. The Hussite movement began in the Kingdom of Bohemia. Gosh. And quickly spread throughout the remaining lands of the Bohemian Crown, including Moravia and Silesia. It also made inroads into the northern parts of the Kingdom of Hungary, but was rejected and gained infamy for the plundering and behavior of the Hussite soldiers. There were also very small temporary communities in Poland, Lithuania, and Transylvania, which moved to Bohemia after being confronted with religious intolerance. It was a regional movement that failed to expand anywhere further. Hussites emerged as a majority Utraquist movement, with the significant Taborite faction, and smaller regional ones included the Adamites, the Orebites, and the Orphans. Major Hussite theologians. Yeah. Okay. Bada. So you guys can check out them. The Hussites actually were important historically speaking and tried to fight off the Catholics, but they eventually got stamped out. Okay, next one. Quintilla was a Phrygian Christian prophetess within the movement known as Montanism. The sect of the Quintilians was named after her. Although the exact date, so this is another Gnostic group, although her exact dates are unknown, Quintilla was probably not a contemporary of the Montanus, Maximilla, and Priscilla, the first generation of Montanus prophets, but was active some decades later after the three were dead. This would place her in the 3rd century. Epiphanius of Salamis, a strong opponent of Montanus, provides the only surviving account of Quintilla's Christophany in his Panarion. He had heard it attributed both to her and Priscilla that the former is more probable. His account is generally regarded as authentic. There are no books. There are no books or any collections of sayings attributed to Quintilla, but her followers kept her memory and her doctrine alive long after her death. Epiphanius says that they came to Papuza for their initiation rites. They had women clergy, which they defended by appealing to Miriam's status as a prophet and the daughters of Philip. Epiphanius also says that they believe that Eve was wise to have eaten the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Something, again, we've seen multiple times regarding our overview here. If this last report is accurate, it suggests that later Quintilians had adopted certain Gnostic teachings. For Epiphanius, the Quintilians are synonymous with the Priscillianists, the Phrygians, and the Papuzians, and a sister sect of the Ordiarites and the John of Damascus also mentions the Quintilians among the Montanist sects, according to something, the Protestantinatus, which was probably composed during the papacy of Sixtus III. There were 2 churches in Papuza, one dedicated to Priscilla and another one dedicated to Quintilla. All right, next one, the Tascodrugites. The Tascodrugites were a sect active in Galatia in the 4th and 5th centuries AD and possibly as late as the 9th. Ancient sources present them variously as Gnostics and heterodox Christians. Most likely they were Montanists. The term Tascodrugites is a nickname referring to their custom during prayer to place a finger in the nose or mouth, at the same time observing the profoundest silence. The practice is attested to Epiphanius. Epiphanius derives the name from the non-Greek words taskos and drungos, which is translates in Greek respectively as snout. Thus, he makes them identical with the sect called the Passalornikites. Jeez. Both the names peg noses, Christian Trevite, translate as nose peggers or nose gaggers. Frank Williams as nose pickers is also a name that was attributed to them. The roots of the Tascos, Druganos, given to Epiphanius are of Celtic origin. They're in fact only attested Galatian words that are not personal or place names, beliefs and practices. Theodoret says that the Tascodrugites ridiculed the sacraments, refusing baptism, rejected the creeds, and repudiated all divine revelation, including the Bible. He describes them as Gnostics, believing in knowledge as the only means of salvation, and connects them to the Marcosians. Epiphanios, on the other hand, considered them a branch of Montanism, possibly a late manifestation of Quintilianism. They were sometimes charged with denying the incarnation of Christ. They seem to have had a special interest in revelation, although sometimes connected with Phrygian paganism. They were better identified as a late sect continuing an apocalyptic tendency more common in early Christianity. Epiphanios records that the Tascodrugites ritually picked infants with needles at a certain feast. This may refer to ritual tattooing or scarification, perhaps in deliberate contradistinction to the mark of the beast. The habit which gave them their name, finger-to-nose gesture, is labeled by Epiphanius as mere affected righteousness. It has been interpreted in several ways as a hand covering the face, contrition during prayer, as a finger over the lips indicating silence, or even as the right hand over the mouth pointing to the forehead to indicate the marks left by the needle. Okay. Right. So again, these are the Tusco-Drugites, and they put the finger in their nose and they sit in significant amounts of silence. So very interesting there. We got another super chat from Chris. Charisma Mysterion throws in $5 and says, let's all take a few seconds of silence to send up a prayer for your health and rejuvenation of your voice. Thanks, brother. Great presentation. Well, thank you so much, Charisma Mysterion. I do appreciate it. I was sick like a couple weeks ago, and just for the last couple of days, my freaking nose has been clogged. I'm not sure why. So I do appreciate the support, brother. Thank you so much, Charisma Mysterion, for the support. Multiple super chats today. Thank you so much, brother. And thank you for being a member, man. Thank you for being a member. God bless you and yours. I truly do appreciate. If you guys can remember me in prayer, I can use all the prayers I can get. So I would greatly appreciate that. Again, major shout out to Charisma Mysterion. Throws in $5. Says, let's all take a few seconds of silence to send up a prayer for your health and a rejuvenation of your voice. Thanks, brother. Great presentation. Well, thank you, brother. And thank you for your support. And I hope you guys are enjoying it. Again, like I said, this is the ultimate overview of Gnosticism. Show me a video or a paper on the internet that is going to talk about all these traditions together. So that was the goal today. I knew it was going to be a long one. I knew it was going to take me a while, but I hope it's worth it. So thank you so much, Charisma Mysterion, for the support, brother. God bless you. Okay, continuing on here, we have the next group is the Aquari. The Aquari. Aquari is a name given to the Christians who substituted water for wine in the Eucharist. You get it? Aqua, Aquari, you get it. The Greek, they are called the hydroperistate, the hydroperistate, or those who offer water. Theodosius I in his edict in 382 classes them as a special sect with the Manichaeans, who also eschewed wine. Catholics consider the substitution an act of heresy. Well, so do the Orthodox. Aquari is considered a misspelling associated with Aquarians, as it has another meaning. Slaves who carried water for bathing into the women's apartments. Other terms used in reference to the Aquarians include the Enchirites. Remember, and the Ebionites, we covered them. So the Aquari substitute wine with water. You get it, aqua. You get it. Okay. The Angelici sect. The Angelici were an obscure heretical sect of the 3rd century. Epiphanius states that little is known of the sect and conjectures that the name either comes from the possibly holding a belief that angels created the world, or else that they believe that they were so pure as to be angels. Citing Epiphanius and expanding, St. Augustine supposes that they called Angelici because of an extravagant worship of angels and such as attended to idolatry. Oh, very, very interesting stuff. So, all right. Let's see here. We do have a super chat that came in. Let me bring this up real quick. In regards to okay, over on the Streamlabs. Let me pull this up. Bam and bam. Here we had one by Walter. Walter throws in $3 and says, "Great stream. God bless. Are you aware of Attack on?" Says Titan. I don't know if he means. Yeah. It is a very popular and esoteric show. It can bring a lot of traffic to your channel because of its relevance, and it is a great piece of art. An Orthodox breakdown would be interesting. No, I am not aware of that. So let me put that up. Are you aware of Attack on Titan? Let me pull it up. Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan. No, I am not aware of this, bro. So this is very interesting. Here, I'll show you guys real quick. This is the attack on Titan. Um, oh, okay. Yeah, I don't really watch too much anime, but you're right. It may be a good popular stream to bring in some new traffic over to the channel. I will. Andrew is a huge fan of Attack on Titan. Oh, interesting. So our beloved Rachel Wilson and our friend Andrew said apparently he's a big fan of Attack on Titan. So I will write this down. I am not aware of it, but I am now. So let me put this over in this browser. So now I have it. I will look into it and do a stream on it. Thank you so much, Walter, for the suggestion. Storm the Cat throws in $5 and says, "Hey, dude." Well, hey, Storm the Cat. God bless you, brother. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for the support, my man. I truly do appreciate the support and everybody. And it looked like one more came in from Jesse Sarasis. Says, "Great stream, really." Well, thank you so much, Jesse. Here, I'll refresh your donation. Again, Jesse said, "Great stream, really." Well, thank you so much, man. I'm glad that you like it. Again, a lot to cover here. So much to cover. So I think that brings me up to date on all the super chats. So thank you so much, guys. Really do appreciate it. And let me see, just making sure. Yeah. Okay, I think we're totally good and caught up. Well, thank you so much, Jesse, for the $10 super chat. I really do appreciate, brother. Thank you very, 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 very much. All right, let's now get back to where we were. Okay, the Abelians. So the Abelians, or the Abelites. The Abelians were a Christian sect that emerged in the 4th century on the countryside near Hippo Regius in North Africa during the reign of Arcadius. They lived in continents as they affirmed Abel did. They were required to be married, but were forbidden to consummate the marriage. So again, no sex, no procreation, another Gnostic tendency. Each couple was required to adopt 2 children, a boy and a girl. When their adoptive parents died, these adoptees would then form a couple and adopt further 2 children. Because no children of Abel are mentioned in Scripture, the Abelians assumed that he had none. This view was influenced by Jewish and Manichaean-inspired Gnostic perspectives on Abel that recognized that while he was married, he remained a virgin. The only record of the sect is in Augustine of Hippo's De Heretics, chapter 87, where he writes that the name of the sect is probably a Punic origin. According to Augustine, the sect became extinct in 428 when its last members converted to Catholicism. Well, Catholicism didn't really exist in 428, so they converted to Orthodoxy and were under the Bishop of Rome. Let's put it that way. So that is the Abelians. How many of you guys even heard of them? Right? Crazy. Next one. Okay, that was Manichaeanism. We did that one. The Albanese. This is basically the Albigensians. Were a Cathar sect in Italy in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. They were absolute dualists, and their headquarters were in Desenzano. The other sects were of moderate dualism. According to Rainier Sacconi, writing in 1250, all the Cathar sects recognized each other in spite of their differences, except the Albanese and the Concorazines, who condemned each other. The Albaneses were the followers of Papa Nicitatus of the Order of Dragunthia. Okay. Interesting stuff. Now we're almost done here, guys. Hang with me. One more. How many of you guys heard of this one? The Astati. The Astati were a Paulician sect. Remember, the Paulicians came from Armenia. The followers of Sergius, they prevailed much under Emperor Nicephorus I, but later under Michael I Rongibus. They were curbed with severe laws. Okay, doesn't really say what their beliefs were, but we can look at the Paulicians and know kind of what they believed in. How many of you guys are aware of this one? Lu Xinang. So Lu Xinang was a leader of a Chinese Manichaean group who led an uprising against the Song dynasty in Taizhou, Zhejiang. He also appears as a minor character in The Water Margin, one of the 4 great classical novels of Chinese literature. In the novel, he is a subordinate of Feng La, a rebel leader of the 108 Stars of Destiny, have to defeat after they received amnesty from Emperor Huaizong. Man, all that Chinese, all the pinyin really comes in handy on the very rare occasion I get to talk about Chinese things. Next one, and last heresy we're covering. Please smash that like for everybody still here. Audianism. The Audians, or the anthropomorphites, were a sect of Christians in the 4th century in Syria and Scythia, named after their founder Audius, who took literally the text of Genesis 21 that God created mankind in his own image. Distinguishing beliefs and practices, including theological anthropomorphism and quartodismanism. Okay, so anthropomorphism holds that God has human form. Audius took the text of Genesis chapter 1 literally and held that God created humans to resemble his physical form. Obviously, that'd be heretical. Quattrodecimans were honoring the death of Christ on the eve of the Jewish Passover instead of following the Roman tradition of celebrating Easter on a Sunday. Aha. And so the history in the First Council of Nicaea was decreed that all Christians should follow the Roman tradition of celebrating Pascha, Easter Sunday, and no longer on the date of 14 of Nisan, the Jewish Passover, and the so-called Quattrodecimans used to do. The Audians, however, continued the Quattrodeciman practice. Epiphanius of Salamis called attention to the Audians, as well as the other sects he considered heretical, in his Panarion. Although Epiphanius is not always a trustworthy source, he correctly quotes the viewpoint of the Audians that the church had abandoned the Father's Paschal rite and the Constantine's time from deference to the emperor and changed the day to suit the emperor. Okay. So again, if you guys want to learn more about that, feel free to look into it. That finally, I'm going to give a special thanks to all the super chatters. But my gosh, how long have we been live right now? We have been live for 3.5 hours. 3.5 hours. Okay, yeah. Rachel said, ask Andrew about doing that with you. I should. Yeah, maybe Andrew and I can do a stream on that together. That'd be fun. Oh, man. Shout out to Tongue Daddy. I appreciate that. Yeah. Again, Andrew, Rachel says, ask Andrew about doing that with you. I definitely will. This is Tongue Daddy says, man, DPH has amazing hair. Thank you so much. I do appreciate that. Thank you very, very much. The Metal Mystic throws in $5 and says, wanted to send out a prayer request for sick and suffering Catherine, a beloved member of my parish. Thanks for the great stream, DPH. Well, let's send a prayer out to Catherine. God bless her, Catherine. Really appreciate the support, brother. And yeah, so I hope she's feeling better. Thank you very, very much, Metal Mystic, for the super chats. I know you super chat earlier. Thank you so much, Metal Mystic, for the support. And again, he throws in $5 and says, wanting to send out a prayer request for the sick and suffering Catherine. So everybody remember Catherine in your prayers tonight. A beloved member of my parish. Thanks for the great stream, DPH. Well, thank you, brother. And thank you for being here. I know it was a long one. We're at 3.5 hours of continual talking. I did not stop talking that whole time, it feels like. So that was a long one. Next super chat comes from Ethan Faber, throws in $5 and says, hope to meet you at Montanica. I will be there at Montanica. I'm actually the only non-clergy that will be there. So I am looking forward to Montanica and to meet you there, brother. So he says, hope to meet you at Montanica. You absolutely will. I'm a Montana native and now live in Wyoming, and am thrilled to see orthodoxy sprouting and flourishing in the mountain states. It really is, right? It's crazy. It seems like, again, there's always been a little community in West Virginia, but it seems like orthodoxy is really growing in the mountain region. I'm talking Utah, Idaho, Montana. I'm not familiar with Wyoming. I know that you said you're over in Wyoming. I'm not really familiar with that over there, but Arizona, the whole monastery down in Arizona where St. Ephraim's from, it seems like that place just keeps growing and growing and growing. So we have some really strong Orthodox communities sprouting up here in the United States. So I just want to thank you, Ethan Faber, for the $5 super chat. I hope to meet you as well as Montanica. I know Rachel and Andrew will be there. Father Turbo will be there. When you meet Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, he's a lot of fun. So when me, FDA, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, and Andrew and Rachel, when we all get together, we tend to have a fun time. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I cannot wait. I really look forward to it. So thank you so much, Ethan Faber. God bless you, brother. And I can't wait to meet you as well. Shout out to Tongue Daddy, says you are the man, DPH. Well, thank you, brother, for all the support. I really do appreciate it. So thank you. Also, we had our beloved. Let me bring this back up just to refresh it for her. Our beloved Amptown One, like I told you guys before, she goes to my church. So I know Amptown One personally. God bless her and her family. Hope your mother's doing well. God bless your husband. Hope everybody's doing well. She throws in a super chat of $5 and says, a man saw me reading my Bible today and asked if I was finding the answers. Then how I knew they were right. Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims think they're right. It was pretty upsetting. I wished I was Jay Dyer. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Well, Amptown One, she's awesome. And that could be frustrating. Like everybody wants to pick on Christians. So I'm not surprised somebody said something like that to you while you were trying to read the Bible. And really, again, we're in Lent right now. So I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it's like the purple demons, as Father Turbo said, the purple demons are out and about, it feels like. So I just want to tell all you guys, make sure you pray, make sure you're on your toes. We're in a very tempting period during Lent. And the demons are upset. The demons were upset, Amptown One. When you're reading your Bible, the demons were upset, right? That's why they wanted to come at you. So don't let it get you down. God bless you, sister. Really appreciate being friends with Amptown One. She's great. I keep her name off. I just use her handle because she prefers it that way. So again, I just want to give a special shout out to everybody who helped me and sent in a super chat today. So I just want to give a special quick handful of thank yous. First one goes to the Metal Mystic. Thank you so much, brother. Shout out to Ethan Faber. Truly appreciate it. Shout out to Rigovich. God bless you. Thank you so much. Shout out to, again, our beloved sister, Rachel Wilson, for becoming a member today. I truly do appreciate it. Shout out to my friend Daniel Soon Kim for becoming a member today. Shout out to Shaunaverse for becoming a member today. Shout out to Charisma Mysterion for your multiple super chats, man. Truly, truly appreciate it. Shout out to Dean Lim 2. Dean Lim 2 throws in $4.99, no comment. Thank you so much, Dean Lim. God bless you, man. And again, the Metal Mystic, Ethan Faber, thank you guys. Truly, truly do appreciate all of it. And then everybody that sent in super chats over on Streamlabs, shout out to Amptown One. Shout out to Jesse Sarasis for the $10 super chat. Shout out to Walter for the $3 super chat. Shout out to Storm the Cat. Shout out to the very generous super chat from Gary. No comment either. Shout out to Gary. Thank you so much, Gary, man. You threw in $100, man. Thank you so very much for supporting the work and everything I do here. It truly means a lot, man. Thank you very, 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 very much. And shout out to it looks like Dr. Vagisil threw in two super chats way earlier. Let's read those real quick. One, he says, America is the poorest country. We have lots of food, but little fellowship. What good is it to eat the best food and no one to share it with? Well, that's true. We need better communities here in the U.S. No doubt about that. I think the Orthodox communities can help deal with some of that. And then Dr. Vagisil threw in another super chat and said, we men often engage in pride because we have all these burdens and expectations to live up to. When we show weakness, women have been taught to use that to manipulate us. That is true. Tear us down so they can feel like they are in charge. We avoid looking weak. It's true. It is a huge deal. I mean, to be a man in the 2023, to be a man in general is, weakness is an enemy. You don't want to look weak, but that also then puts a sort of a pressure on us. But we're called to be a pillar. We're called to be responsible. We're called to be that force that people can rely on and lean against. So, it's a different calling, but I totally feel it. Dr. Vagisil, thank you so much, bro. Always supporting. And guys, that is going to do it. I am beat. This was a 3.5 hour stream. I knew it was going to be a long one. I just want to thank everybody for being here. God bless you guys. Please smash that like. Special thank you to everybody who super chatted today. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you for my new members. Thank you to Shaunaverse. Thank you for Asung Kim. And thank you, Rachel Wilson, for becoming members. God bless you all. Thank you so much. And I will be back tomorrow for a St. Patrick's Day stream. That's my name day. So I will be back tomorrow. Thank you all so much for the support. And until next time, which is tomorrow, as always, God bless.